Imagine waking up in near-total darkness, your back pressed against cold, damp earth, through a threadbare blanket that's somehow both too thin and too scratchy. The air inside the tent is thick, so thick you can taste it, a suffocating blend of unwashed bodies, stale alcohol, leather gone sour with sweat and something metallic that coats your tongue. That's armour oil mixed with old blood that never quite washes out of fabric. Outside a rooster crows, but it's not the cheerful farm sound you're imagining. It's shrill panicked, almost like even the livestock knows what's coming today. You're a foot soldier in a medieval army, and you've got maybe 12 hours before you're standing in a field where trained killers on horseback will try to separate your head from your shoulders. Welcome to your day. Spoiler alert, statistically speaking, you probably won't survive this, and even if you do, you might wish you hadn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this strange little community spans the globe, all of us gathered here in the dark, learning about history's less glamorous moments. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The tent you're sharing with 15 other men is barely large enough for 8. Bodies are pressed together not for warmth, though that's a side benefit in the pre-dawn chill, but because there simply isn't room. The guy next to you is snoring with his mouth open, and his breath could strip paint. 2 men over someone's grinding their teeth so loudly it sounds like a millstone working. In the far corner you can hear quiet sobbing. That's Thomas the baker's son from your village. He's 16. This is his first campaign. He hasn't stopped crying since they conscripted him 3 weeks ago. Your own age, maybe 22 if you're lucky. Life expectancy for a medieval peasant who stays home and farms is around 30 to 40 years, but you're not farming right now. You're in an army camp somewhere in what will one day be France or England, or the contested borders of some duchy whose name you can't even pronounce. The year might be 1346 or 1415 or any of a dozen other dates, when kings decided their honour was worth more than your life. The reality is you didn't volunteer for this. Volunteering is a modern concept, a luxury of nations that pretend to value individual choice. No, you were conscripted. The lord who owns the land your family work sent his bailiff through the village with a list. Every able-bodied man between 15 and 40. No exceptions, no exemptions, unless you were wealthy enough to pay someone to go in your place. You weren't. Here's something they don't tell you in the movies: medieval armies smell absolutely horrific. We're talking about thousands of men living in close quarters, with no running water, no soap worth mentioning, and a truly medieval understanding of hygiene. The Romans had public baths. The medieval period, they thought bathing too frequently would let disease in through your open pores, so you haven't properly washed in weeks. Neither has anyone else. The latrine situation is exactly as nightmare-inducing as you're imagining. There's a ditch at the edge of camp, and that's where several thousand men are handling their business. No privacy, no toilet paper, you're using leaves. If you're lucky, moss if you're not. And just your hand if there's nothing else available. Dysentery is so common that having solid bowel movements would actually be newsworthy. Historians still argue whether more medieval soldiers died from disease or actual combat, but the smart money is heavily on disease. You sit up careful not to elbow the guy next to you who's finally fallen asleep after a night of fever dreams and muttering. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. The ground is unforgiving even through your thin bedroll, and you've been marching for days. Your feet are a disaster, blisters on top of blisters, some of them infected, all of them screaming every time you put weight on them. Through the tent flap you can see the sky beginning to lighten. It's that pre-dawn grey that somehow feels more ominous than full darkness. Somewhere in the distance you hear the clank of armour, the whinny of horses' officers shouting orders. The camp is waking up, the army is preparing, And somewhere out there, beyond the morning mist, is another army. Men just like you pressed into service, terrified, homesick, knowing that today might be the day they die, screaming in a muddy field for a cause they don't understand in a war. They didn't start for a lord who doesn't know their name. But first breakfast, if you can call it that. Your stomach is already cramping, but whether that's from hunger or the perpetual low-grade dysentery that's plagued you since week 1 of this campaign, you honestly can't tell anymore. The two sensations have merged into one constant background discomfort that you've almost learned to ignore. You crawl out of the tent into the grey morning, and the first thing that hits you is the cold. It's always cold in the morning, even in summer, and your threadbare tunic does absolutely nothing to keep it out. The cook fires are already smoking, which is a generous way of describing the sad little flames struggling against damp wood. Medieval armies moved on their stomachs, just like modern ones, but the cuisine was, shall we say, less than inspiring. You shuffle toward the nearest fire, joining a line of men who look exactly as miserable as you feel. Nobody's talking, it's too early, and besides, what is there to say? Good morning, hope I don't die today. That sentiment is so universal it doesn't need voicing. The camp cook, and that's a generous title for someone whose main qualification is owning a large pot, is ladling out breakfast. You hold out your wooden bowl, the same one you've been eating from for weeks. You haven't washed it properly since you left home. The cook dumps a greyish slop into it that might charitably be called pottage. It's basically water with some grain boiled in it, until it achieves a consistency somewhere between soup and paste. If you're very lucky, there might be some onion in there, a small sad piece of turnip, maybe a bit of salted pork so old and tough it could double as armour. Here's a fun fact: medieval soldiers consumed somewhere between 3,000 to 6,000 calories a day when food was available, because marching in armour and fighting for your life burns energy like you wouldn't believe. But here's the less fun fact: food wasn't always available. Supply lines were a constant problem. Armies would strip the countryside bare like locusts, taking everything edible and leaving famine in their wake. The locals learned to hide their food, bury their grain, drive their livestock deep into the forests. Can't blame them, really. The bread comes next. You're handed a chunk of maslin that's bread made from a mixture of wheat and rye, or sometimes wheat and barley, or sometimes whatever grain was cheapest when they baked it 3 weeks ago. It's rock hard. Not stale bagel hard. More like, this could be used as a weapon hard. There's a reason they called these things trenchers. Sometimes they were literally hard enough to use as plates. You've learned the trick: dip it in your pottage to soften it. Let it soak up the liquid, then gnaw at it like a dog with a particularly challenging bone. The taste. Imagine cardboard that's been left in a basement for 6 months, then seasoned with disappointment. Medieval bakers weren't exactly working with refined white flour here. This bread is dark, coarse, full of grit, because the millstones that ground the grain also ground bits of themselves into the flour. You'll be picking stone fragments out of your teeth later. Historians still argue whether the terrible dental health of medieval people was more due to sugar consumption, which was actually quite low for common folk, or the constant wearing down of teeth by gritty bread. The bread is winning that debate. And then there's the beer. Yes, beer for breakfast. Before you get excited, understand that medieval small beer was nothing like the craft IPA you're imagining. This was weak, often sour, sometimes slightly mouldy beer that existed primarily because it was safer to drink than water. The brewing process killed bacteria and the alcohol content low, as it was helped preserve it. Did it taste good? Absolutely not. It tasted like someone had wrung out a dirty sock into a barrel and let it ferment in the sun. But it was wet, it had some chloric content, and it probably wouldn't give you cholera, which made it a luxury beverage by medieval army standards. You drink it warm because there's no ice, no refrigeration, nothing cold except the morning air and the growing dread in your chest. The wooden cup is slimy on the inside from God knows what kind of bacterial film, but you've long since stopped caring about such niceties. You drain it, feel the vaguely alcoholic warmth hit your empty stomach, and immediately regret it as your intestines gurgle ominously. Around you, other soldiers are having similar experiences with breakfast. Some are dunking their bread so long it basically dissolves into the pottage, creating a gruel they can drink. Others are trying to trade, "I'll give you my bread for your extra beer," as if either commodity were precious. A few men aren't eating at all. They're the ones who've given up, who know in their bones that today is their last day, and they're past caring about nutrition. There's a hierarchy even at breakfast. You can see the sergeants and men-at-arms eating closer to the officers' tents, and their portions are noticeably larger. They might even have cheese, actual cheese. The mounted knights. They're dining on something that probably includes meat, real bread made from sifted flour, possibly even wine instead of this swill that passes for beer. But you're not a knight. You're not even a sergeant. You're a foot soldier, the lowest rung on the medieval military ladder, and your breakfast reflects your station. The whole meal takes maybe 10 minutes. There's no lingering over coffee. Coffee won't reach Europe for another few centuries. No pleasant breakfast conversation, no checking your phone. Just fuel in, try to keep it down. Prepare for whatever fresh hell the day has planned. You scrape the last of the pottage from your bowl with your fingers, lick them clean, because wasting food is unthinkable, and steel yourself for the next phase of the morning, getting into your armour. Oh joy! The armour is waiting for you in a heap where you left it last night, and just looking at it makes you tired. This isn't the gleaming plate armour you've seen in museums or movies that's for knights, for people with money, for individuals whose lives their lords actually value. No, you've got what's called a munitions grade kit, which is medieval speak for the cheapest protection we could mass produce that might keep you alive for 5 minutes. Your primary defence is a gambeson, which is essentially a quilted jacket stuffed with wool linen scraps or whatever fabric could be crammed between 2 layers of cloth. It looks ridiculous, puffy stained with old sweat, and God knows what else smelling like a wet dog that rolled in something dead. But here's the thing, it actually works. That padding can stop a glancing sword blow, absorb some of the impact from a mace, and might even slow down an arrow if you're incredibly lucky and it hits at the right angle. The gambeson is also heavy, maybe 8 to 10 pounds, and wearing it is like being hugged by a very aggressive, very sweaty bear. You pull it on over your tunic and immediately you're warmer, which seems nice now in the cool morning air, but will be absolute torture once the sun is up and you're marching. Medieval soldiers in summer could literally die from heat exhaustion inside their armour. No breathable fabrics, no moisture-wicking technology, just you slowly cooking in your own sweat like a particularly miserable pot roast. Over the gambeson goes your mail shirt if you're fortunate enough to have been issued one. Mail, or chain mail, as it's incorrectly called in modern times, is thousands of interlocking iron rings that form a flexible metal fabric. Sounds cool, right? It's not. First, it weighs anywhere from 15 to 30 pounds depending on how long the shirt is. Second, it doesn't distribute weight evenly. All those pounds are pulling down on your shoulders, straining your neck, making your upper back scream after about an hour. Third, it's loud. Every movement sounds like you're rattling a bag of chains, which makes stealth absolutely impossible. Here's something they discovered in recent experimental archaeology. Mail doesn't actually stop a solid thrust or heavy blow as well as you'd think. A sword point can sometimes push through the rings, and a mace or hammer. That's going through mail like it's not even there though. The gambeson underneath might save you from the worst of it. Mail's real strength is against slashing attacks. A sword drawn across mail will skitter off without cutting, which is genuinely useful in the chaos of close combat, where most strikes aren't perfect thrusts. Getting into mail requires help. You can't just pull it on like a shirt, it's too heavy and unwieldy. Someone has to hold it up while you duck your head through, then help guide your arms through the sleeves. This morning that someone is Robert, the carpenter from 2 villages over, who's become your tent mate and something approaching a friend. He grunts as he lifts the mail and you grunt as the weight settles onto your shoulders. Friendship in medieval armies is born from shared misery and the practical necessity of keeping each other alive. Next comes your helmet. You've been issued what's called a kettle hat, a wide-brimmed iron helmet that looks like someone took a cooking pot and decided it would make decent head protection. They weren't entirely wrong. The wide brim helps deflect blows from above, and it's relatively lightweight compared to full enclosed helms. But it offers 0 face protection, which means your jaw, nose and eyes are completely vulnerable. Arrows, sword points, mace strikes. Your face is basically an invitation for all of them. The helmet smells like rust and old fear. The inside is lined with some scraps of cloth that were supposed to pad it, but they've compressed and become crusty with dried sweat. When you put it on, your field of vision immediately narrows. The brim blocks your peripheral vision, and suddenly the world becomes a smaller, more claustrophobic place. Combat in a helmet is disorienting. You can't see threats coming from the sides, you can't hear as well. And if it shifts during fighting, you might as well be blind. Your weapons are almost laughably simple. You've got a spear, just a wooden shaft, maybe 8 feet long, with an iron point at the end. No fancy crossguard, no decorative elements, just a sharp metal triangle attached to wood. This is your primary weapon, and it's actually more effective than you might think. Spears keep enemies at distance, they're easy to use in formation, and they can punch through armor if you thrust hard enough. The problem is they break. Wooden shafts snap, iron points bend, and once your spear is gone, you're in serious trouble. For backup, you have a knife. Not a sword. Swords are expensive, require skill and training, and are generally reserved for people higher up the social ladder. Your knife is basically a large utility blade, maybe 10 inches long, useful for eating cutting rope and as an absolute last resort in combat. Fighting with a knife against someone with a sword is a great way to die quickly. Some soldiers have been issued a buckler, a small round shield maybe 12 inches across. It's not much, but it's something to catch a blade with, to punch someone in the face with, to maybe save your life if you're skilled and lucky. You weren't issued one. Budget cuts probably. Your lord needed the money for his new hunting hawks. The total weight of everything you're wearing is somewhere between 30 and 50 pounds, depending on exactly what you've been issued. That might not sound like much people carry backpacks that heavy, but try carrying that weight all day in the heat, while marching, while terrified, while dehydrated, while your body's already weakened from poor nutrition and disease. It's exhausting before you even begin fighting. You look around at your fellow soldiers, all going through the same ritual of strapping on their gear. Everyone moves slowly, methodically, with the resigned air of people putting on their own burial shrouds. Because that's what this armor might be, not protection, but just metal decoration for your corpse. The sun is fully up now. Officers are shouting, it's time to march. The command ripples through camp like a wave. Form up, column order, move your asses! The sergeants are doing what sergeants have done throughout military history, bellowing at the common soldiers threatening violence, herding you into something resembling an organised formation. You fall in line with your unit, which is a generous term for the random collection of farmers, tradesmen and unlucky bastards you've been assigned to. There's no real cohesion here, no sense of being a well-oiled military machine. Just tired men with sharp objects pointed in a direction and told to walk. The march begins, and within the first 100 yards you remember why you hate marching more than almost anything else about military life. Your feet, already a disaster of blisters and raw skin, immediately start screaming. Medieval footwear was not designed for long-distance walking. You're wearing leather shoes, if you're lucky, that are basically just shaped pieces of hide with minimal support. Some men are walking in boots that don't fit, traded or stolen from someone with different-sized feet. A few unlucky souls have shoes that literally falling apart, held together with strips of cloth and prayer. The road, if you can call it that, is a nightmare. Medieval roads were barely maintained dirt tracks that turned into rivers of mud when it rained and clouds of choking dust when it didn't. Right now, you're dealing with mud, thick, sucking mud that grabs at your feet with every step, making each forward movement an exercise in extraction. Your shoes are soaked within minutes, and wet leather rubs differently than dry leather. New blisters are forming on top of old ones. The medical term for what's happening to your feet is trench foot, though that term won't be invented for another few centuries. The reality is tissue breakdown infection, and eventually gangrene if you're unlucky. The column stretches ahead and behind you for what seems like miles. Thousands of men walking in rough formation, kicking up dust or mud depending on conditions, creating a shuffling, clanking, miserable parade of human suffering. The sound is incredible. Thousands of feet hitting the ground, armour rattling weapons clanking against shields, men coughing, cursing, occasionally crying out when they step wrong or their weakened bodies finally give out. Every 20 minutes or so, someone collapses, just drops right there in the column. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, disease, exhaustion, take your pick. The first few times you saw this happen, you were shocked. Now you barely glance over. The sergeants pull the fallen man to the side of the road and the column keeps moving. If he's lucky, he'll recover enough to catch up later or get thrown in a supply wagon. If he's not lucky, he'll die right there in the ditch and his body will be stripped of anything useful by whoever finds him next. Dysentery is hitting people hard during the march. You can always tell when someone's in trouble because they'll suddenly break formation, stumble to the side of the road and squat with a look of absolute desperation. Privacy doesn't exist. Dignity doesn't exist. You're literally shitting yourself to death in front of thousands of witnesses, and all you can hope is that you finish before the column moves so far ahead you can't catch up. Falling behind is dangerous. Stragglers get picked off by enemy scouts, local bandits, or sometimes just wild animals. The woods on either side of the road could hide anything, and speaking of those woods, they're terrifying. Dense, dark medieval forests weren't the pleasant hiking trails you're imagining. These were old-growth forests so thick that sunlight barely penetrated, full of wolves, wild boar bears, and potentially human threats that were even worse. Every army on the march lived in fear of ambush. Enemy scouts could be watching from those trees right now, counting your numbers, identifying weak points in the column, preparing to attack when you're most vulnerable. Historians still argue about how accurate medieval casualty reports from ambushes really are, but the psychological impact was undeniable. You're walking through potentially hostile territory, exhausted, unable to see threats, knowing that an arrow could come from the tree line at any moment. Some men handle this by just not looking at the forest. If I can't see the threat, maybe it can't see me, right? Others can't stop looking, constantly scanning the shadows, jumping at every bird call or rustling leaf. Both approaches lead to exhaustion in different ways. The pace is brutal, roughly 2 to 3 miles per hour when conditions are good, slower in mud or rough terrain. Medieval armies could cover maybe 15 to 20 miles in a day. If they were pushing hard, less if the terrain was bad or supplies were short. That might not sound like much, but remember you're carrying 40 pounds of gear, you're malnourished. You're probably sick with something, and your feet are disintegrating inside your shoes. Every mile is agony. Water is a constant concern. The column occasionally passes streams or wells, and when it does, there's a desperate scramble to refill water skins and drink as much as possible. But you can't trust the water. That stream might be downstream from a village that dumps its waste in it. That well might be contaminated. Drink bad water and you'll get dysentery, but don't drink at all, and you'll collapse from dehydration. It's a choice between different kinds of suffering. The sun climbs higher and the temperature inside your armour rises accordingly. You're sweating profusely now, and that sweat has nowhere to go. It's trapped between your body and the gamison, between the gamson and the male, creating a humid, disgusting microclimate that's breeding bacteria like crazy. The smell radiating off the column is probably detectable for miles. Thousands of unwashed men sweating inside metal and leather, their collective stench a biological weapon in its own right. Around midday, the column finally stops for a brief rest. You collapse where you stand too tired to even look for shade. Your legs are trembling, your feet are screaming, and you've got at least several more hours of marching ahead before you reach wherever the hell you're going. Someone passes around dried meat that's so hard and salty it's like chewing leather, but you gnaw at it anyway because you need the calories. Robert, your tent mate, catches your eye and gives a weak smile that says everything. This is hell, we're in hell. We've always been in hell. You smile back because what else is there to do? The rest lasts maybe 20 minutes. Then the sergeants are shouting again, and the column lurches back into motion, one foot in front of the other. Don't think about how far you've come or how far you have to go, just the next step, and the next, and the next. The hierarchy in a medieval army isn't just about rank, it's about your fundamental worth as a human being, at least in the eyes of those above you. And you as a foot soldier are at the absolute bottom of that hierarchy. You're below the mounted knights, obviously. You're below the men-at-arms who fight on foot but come from better families. You're below the sergeants who at least have some authority. You're even below the camp followers and supply train workers, because at least they have specialised skills. You're replaceable. Utterly, completely replaceable. The knights don't even look at you. When they ride past on their war horses, you have to get out of the way or risk being trampled, and they won't slow down. They won't apologise. You might as well be a rock in the road for all they care. These are men who've trained for warfare since childhood, who own land, who have family names that mean something. You're a peasant with a spear conscripted from a village they'd need a map to find. The social distance between you and them is so vast it might as well be a different species. Here's a fun little reality check. If a knight accidentally kills you during training, or even just because he's in a bad mood, the legal consequences for him are minimal. He might have to pay a small fine to your lord, not to your family, mind you, but to the lord who technically owns your labour. Your life has a monetary value, and it's shockingly low. A good horse is worth more than you. A decent sword is worth more than you. Hell, depending on the era and location, a hunting falcon might be valued higher than your entire existence. You learn quickly not to make eye contact with your betters. Looking directly at a knight or noble is seen as aggressive, presumptuous, and assertion of equality that you absolutely do not possess. You keep your eyes down, you move out of the way, you say yes sir and no sir, and you never ever question orders. The penalty for insubordination can range from a beating to execution depending on how strictly discipline is being enforced and how irritable the officer is feeling. The beatings are casual, almost recreational for some of the sergeants. You see it happen multiple times a day. Some poor bastard moves too slowly or doesn't show proper respect or is just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and suddenly he's on the ground getting kicked by a man in better armour with a stick or the flat of a sword. Nobody intervenes, nobody protests, because that could be you next and everyone knows it. The military justice system is simple: might makes right, rank makes law, and you have neither might nor rank. There's a particularly cruel sergeant in your company named Geoffrey, who seems to genuinely enjoy humiliating the common soldiers. He's got this thing where he'll make men fight each other for his amusement, puts two exhausted, starving soldiers in a circle, and makes them wrestle or box while he and his friends place bets. The loser gets no dinner. The winner gets the loser's dinner, which still isn't enough food, but it's something. You've managed to avoid being selected so far, but you've watched Robert get put in the circle twice. He lost both times. He's not a fighter. He's a carpenter, for God's sake, but that doesn't matter to Geoffrey. The class divide extends to every aspect of military life. The knights sleep in proper tents with cots, maybe even beds if they're high-ranking enough. They eat meat, drink wine, have servants to maintain their equipment. You sleep on the ground, eat gruel, and clean your own gear if you can figure out how. When it rains, the nights stay relatively dry in their waterproof tents. You get soaked, and you stay soaked, because there's nowhere to dry off and no spare clothing. Medical care follows the same pattern. If a knight is wounded, he gets immediate attention from the best surgeons available, and best is a relative term in medieval medicine, but still. They'll actually try to save him, partly because his family can pay ransom if he's captured, partly because he's considered valuable. You get wounded. You'll be lucky if someone bothers to tie a dirty rag around it. If the wound gets infected, and it probably will, you'll either recover on your own or die quietly in a corner somewhere. There's no evacuation for common soldiers, no medical retirement, no disability pension. You're useful until you're not, and then you're discarded. Historians still argue about exactly how many common soldiers survived major medieval battles, but the numbers are grim. Even in victories, the foot soldiers took catastrophic casualties, sometimes 30, 40, even 50% losses, and those are just the immediate battlefield deaths. Factor in the men who died from wounds in the days and weeks after the ones who succumbed to disease, the ones who were too injured to keep up with the army, and were simply left behind. The real mortality rate was probably much higher. You witness a particularly stark example of the hierarchy one morning when a knight's horse throws a shoe. The knight, some young nobleman with clean hands and shinier armour, immediately commandeers a peasant's wagon to transport his horse until a farrier can be found. The peasant protests that wagon has his family's belongings, their food supplies, and the knight backhands him so hard the man falls. The knight's companions laugh. Nobody helps the peasant up. His wagon is taken, his possessions dumped in the mud, and he's told he'll get his wagon back when we're done with it, which could mean hours, days, or never. The thing that really gets to you, though, is the casual nature of it all. The cruelty isn't born from rage or even particular malice. It's just the natural order of things in their minds. Knights are superior beings chosen by God, and blood to rule and fight. You're a tool like a plough or a wagon. Tools don't have feelings. Tools don't deserve consideration. You break a tool, you get another one. There are small acts of rebellion, tiny assertions of dignity that soldiers engage in when the officers aren't looking, spitting after a knight rides by, making jokes about their elaborate armour or their prissy horses, stealing extra rations when possible. These are small, meaningless gestures that change nothing about your situation, but at least remind you that you're still human, still capable of contempt for those who treat you as less than human. But you have to be careful. So careful. Because one wrong word, one gesture interpreted as disrespectful, and you could find yourself in serious trouble. There's a man in another company who supposedly said something insulting about his lord within earshot of a sergeant. They tied him to a wagon wheel and whipped him until he passed out. He died 2 days later from infection. Nobody was punished. Nobody even thought it was particularly unusual, so you keep your head down, your mouth shut, and you endure. What choice do you have? The army finally stops marching in the early afternoon, and the word filters down through the ranks with the speed of wildfire battle positions. Your stomach drops. This is it. This is actually happening. All the marching, all the suffering, all the fear, it was all leading to this moment when you'll stand in a field and try not to die, while other men actively try to kill you. The officers are screaming orders, organising the chaos of thousands of men into something resembling a battle formation. You're shoved and pushed into position alongside soldiers you barely know. The man on your left is someone you've never spoken to. Pale face, maybe 18 years old, shaking so badly his spear is vibrating. The man on your right is older, maybe 30, with a scar across his cheek and dead eyes that suggest he's seen this before and knows exactly how bad it's going to be. You're in what's called a battle line, which sounds organised and tactical, but feels more like being packed into a human wall of meat and metal. The front rank, thank God you're not in the front rank today, is the one that will make contact with the enemy first. Those men have a life expectancy measured in minutes once the fighting starts. You're in the third rank, which is simultaneously better and worse. Better because you're less likely to die immediately. Worse because you have to stand there watching the men in front of you get cut down knowing you're next. The formation is supposed to be tight shields overlapping. If you have shield spears bristling outward like a porcupine, everyone supporting everyone else. The theory is that a tight formation is stronger than the sum of its parts, that discipline and cohesion can overcome individual skill. The practice is that you're crammed so close to the men around you that you can smell their fear, feel their trembling, hear their whispered prayers to saints you've never heard of. Your spear feels inadequate. It felt substantial enough back in camp, but now looking across the field at what you can see of the enemy formation in the distance, it seems like a toy. Just a stick with a pointy end. What were you thinking? What were any of you thinking? You're farmers and craftsmen playing at being soldiers, about to fight other farmers and craftsmen who are also playing at being soldiers, all because some lords had a disagreement about who owns what piece of land or whose honour was insulted at a feast. The waiting is psychological torture. Once you're in formation, you don't immediately fight. You stand there, and stand there, and stand there some more. The enemy is visible across the field. You can see their banners, the glint of their weapons, the dark mass of their formation. But nobody is moving yet. The commanders are probably negotiating or positioning cavalry or waiting for some tactical advantage. For you, it just means standing in the sun in your armour, sweating and terrifying yourself with your own imagination. This is when men lose control of their bladders. You're not supposed to talk about it, but it happens constantly. The combination of fear, the hours of waiting, the water you drank during the march, suddenly someone in your rank is standing in a puddle of his own piss, and nobody says anything because they're all terrified they'll be next. Some men have already shit themselves. The smell is mixing with the sweat, the leather, the horse dung from the cavalry positioned behind you, creating an olfactory nightmare that would be comedic if it wasn't so tragic. Your hands won't stop shaking. You're gripping your spear so tightly your knuckles are white, but you can't seem to make your hands steady. The young man to your left is crying openly now, tears running down his face while he stares straight ahead. Nobody comforts him. What would you say? It'll be okay. It won't be okay. Some of you are going to die today, and there's no way to know who until it happens. These sergeants are walking behind the formation now, and their job is simple. Make sure nobody runs. That's what the rear ranks are partly for, not just to reinforce the front, but to prevent retreat. If you try to flee, the sergeants will cut you down, or the cavalry will ride you down, or you'll be hanged later as a deserter. You're trapped between the enemy in front and your own army behind. The only way out is through and through means fighting. Historians still argue about how much actual tactical training medieval foot soldiers received, but from your personal experience it was minimal to non-existent. You were shown how to hold a spear, told to stay in formation, and given some vague instruction about stick the pointy end in the enemy. That was it. No drilling, no practice manoeuvres, no realistic combat training. You've never actually thrust this spear at a living person. You've never felt it punch through flesh and grate against bone. You have no idea if you'll even be capable of doing it when the moment comes. There's a strange sound rising from the formation, low murmuring that's part prayer, part whimper, part incomprehensible vocalization of fear. Men are praying to God, to Jesus, to Mary, to every saint they can remember. Some are making promises. If you let me survive this, I'll build a shrine, or I'll go on pilgrimage, or I'll never sin again. These are desperate negotiations with the divine bargains that probably won't be kept, even if they do survive, but in this moment they're deadly sincere. You find yourself praying too, though you're not sure what you're praying for. Not glory, you don't want glory. Not honor seems like an abstract concept invented by people who don't have to stand in formations waiting to die. You're praying for something simpler. Please let me live through the next few hours. Please let me see my family again. Please don't let it hurt too much if I die. The sun is beating down mercilessly. You can feel sweat running down your back, pooling at the base of your spine, soaking into the gambeson. Your throat is dry, but your water skin is empty, and you don't dare break formation to get more. Your feet are still screaming from the march, your shoulders ache from the weight of the mail, and now your legs are starting to tremble from standing in one position for so long. Somewhere in the distance a trumpet sounds. The enemy formation is moving. Very slowly, like a living organism, their battle line begins to advance, and somewhere behind you, your own trumpets answer. Your formation tenses. This is it. The waiting is almost over. The scarred man to your right mutters something under his breath. You catch only part of it. Just like last time, God have mercy. You don't ask him what happened last time. You don't want to know. The enemy formation is moving, but they're not running. Not yet. They're advancing at a slow, measured pace, and somehow that's more terrifying than if they'd just charged. You can see them now with horrible clarity, rows of men just like you, carrying spears just like yours, wearing armour that's just as mismatched and inadequate. They're close enough that you can make out individual faces, see the fear that mirrors your own. In another world, under different circumstances, you might have shared a drink with some of these men. Now you're going to try to kill each other. The sound of their approach is like thunder that never stops, thousands of feet hitting the ground. In rough rhythm, the clank and rattle of equipment, war cries that start as aggressive shouts but carry undertones of terror. Your own formation is making noise too, though you're not sure if you're contributing to it. Your mouth is too dry to shout. Your throat has closed up with fear. All you can do is stand there, spear gripped in sweating hands, watching death approach at walking speed. Time does something strange when you're waiting for combat. It simultaneously crawls and races. Each second feels like an hour, but the enemy formation that was hundreds of yards away is now 50 yards away, and you have no idea how that happened. Your perception is narrowing to a tunnel. You can barely see the men on either side of you anymore. Your entire world has become that advancing wall of humanity and metal. Someone in your rank vomits, just bends forward and empties his stomach right there, the sound wet and pathetic. Nobody moves to help him. Nobody even seems to notice. Everyone is locked in their own private hell of anticipation, counting down the seconds until impact. The vomiting man straightens up, wipes his mouth with a shaking hand, and repositions his spear. At least he's still standing. That's something. Your heart is pounding so hard you can hear it in your ears, a thunderous drumbeat that's drowning out everything else. Your breathing has gone rapid and shallow. You're almost hyperventilating, but you can't seem to control it. This is what pure terror feels like. Not the fear of monsters or ghosts or supernatural things, but the rational, calculated fear of knowing that in the next few minutes men with sharp objects are going to try their absolute best to kill you, and there's nothing you can do to prevent it except try to kill them first. The sergeants behind you are shouting encouragement that sounds more like threats. Hold the line, stand your ground. First man who runs, I'll gut him myself. Inspirational, really. Nothing motivates quite like knowing your own army might kill you if you try to flee. This is how medieval formations held together, not through loyalty or courage, but through the simple mathematics of fear. More afraid of the punishment for running than of the enemy to your front. 30 yards now. You can see details that you wish you couldn't. The face of the man directly across from you in their formation. He's got a beard, brown and scraggly, and his eyes are wide with the same terror you're feeling. There's a kind of horrible intimacy in this moment. You and this bearded stranger are about to try to kill each other, and neither of you wants to be here. But history and circumstance and the commands of men who'll never stand in a formation like this have brought you to this field, and now the machine of war is in motion and cannot be stopped. Your bladder is screaming. You ignored it during the long wait, but now it's an urgent, desperate pressure, and you realize with a distant sort of horror that you're probably going to piss yourself. And then you do. The warmth spreads down your legs, soaking into your already disgusting trousers, and you feel a moment of shame before realizing that shame is a luxury you can't afford right now. Survival is all that matters. Dignity died somewhere back on the march. 20 yards. The enemy formation is close enough that you can hear their individual voices now, not just a general roar, but specific words, curses, prayers, someone screaming what might be a war cry, or might just be incoherent terror. Their front rank has levelled their spears, pointing them directly at your formation, and you can see the iron points glinting in the sunlight. Each one of those points is designed for one purpose: to punch through armour and flesh and end a human life. Historians still argue about what percentage of soldiers in medieval battles actually fought versus how many just stood there frozen or went through the motions without really engaging. Some studies suggest that in any given battle, maybe only 15 to 20% of soldiers were actively, effectively fighting at any one time. The rest were paralysed by fear or wounded, or trying to stay alive without actually engaging the enemy. You understand that statistic now in a way you never did before. Part of you, a large part, is already planning how to look like you're fighting without actually putting yourself in danger. 10 yards. This is the distance where everything becomes real in a way it wasn't before. You can smell the enemy now. They smell exactly like you, like sweat and fear and human waste. You can see the variations in their equipment, the men who are better armed, the ones who look even more terrified than you feel. The bearded man you've been watching has tears on his face. You might have tears on yours. You're not sure. Everything has taken on a dreamlike, unreal quality, like this is happening to someone else, and you're just watching. The man to your left, the young one who's been shaking, suddenly breaks, just drops his spear and runs. Doesn't even try to go through the enemy. He runs sideways out of the formation toward the open field. One of the sergeants moves to intercept him, but there's no time. The formations are 5 yards apart, 3 yards. The sergeant lets the boy go. There'll be time to hunt down deserters later if anyone survives. 1 yard. You can see the pause on the bearded man's face. You can see the fear in his eyes and know he's seeing the same thing in yours. Your spear is shaking in your hands. His spear is shaking in his. Neither of you is a warrior. Neither of you chose this. But in about 2 seconds, you're going to collide and one of you might die and there's nothing either of you can do to stop it. 0 yards. The formations crash together with a sound like the world ending. The collision is nothing like you imagined. In your mind, you'd pictured something clean, almost choreographed swords clashing heroic duels, clear moments of victory or defeat. The reality is chaos incarnate. It's a screaming, shoving, stabbing nightmare where you can't see more than 3 feet in any direction, and you have no idea what's happening beyond the immediate sphere of your own survival. The first thing that hits you is the noise. Not just loud, overwhelming, disorienting, a wall of sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Men screaming in rage, in pain, in terror. Metal hitting metal, metal hitting wood, metal hitting flesh, each with its own distinct horrible sound. The front ranks have made contact, and the men in the second rank are pushing forward, and you're in the third rank being shoved from behind, pushed inexorably toward the violence whether you want to go or not. You can't see the bearded man anymore. The formations have interpenetrated in a way that makes no sense tactically but happens anyway. Pockets of your army mixed with pockets of theirs, the neat lines dissolving into a churning mass of bodies and weapons. The man directly in front of you, someone from your own army, suddenly goes down with a spear in his side, and now there's nothing between you and the enemy except 3 feet of blood-slicked mud. A face appears in front of you. Not the bearded man, someone else younger, screaming something incomprehensible. He's thrusting a spear at you, and your body reacts before your mind catches up. You bring your own spear up, deflecting his thrust, and suddenly You're engaged in something that barely qualifies as combat. There's no technique, no skill, just desperate flailing attempts to not die, while maybe inflicting harm on this stranger who's trying to kill you. His spear point catches your shoulder, scraping across the mail with a sound like fingernails on slate. The mail holds this time, but the impact spins you slightly and you lose your footing in the mud. Your falling and falling in battle is death, because once you're down, you're getting trampled or stabbed or both. Your hand shoots out, grabbing onto someone you don't even know if it's friend or enemy, and you use them to haul yourself upright. Whoever it was curses at you, but you're already moving, already trying to reorient yourself in the chaos. The young enemy soldier is still there, still coming at you, and this time your spear thrust connects. You feel it punch through his gambeson, feel the resistance of fabric and flesh, and then he's screaming a high, piercing scream that will haunt your dreams, if you survive long enough to have dreams. He drops his weapon and clutches at the spear shaft protruding from his gut, and you realize with horror that you can't pull your spear back out. It's stuck in him, caught on something inside his body, and he's stumbling backward, taking your primary weapon with him. You've just killed a man, or mortally wounded him. He's still alive, still screaming, collapsing to his knees in the mud. You should feel something: triumph, remorse, horror, but there's no time for feelings, because someone else is already moving into that space and you're weaponless, except for your knife, which is laughably inadequate against an armoured man with a spear. The scarred man who was standing to your right earlier, you've lost track of him in the chaos, suddenly appears next to you. He's covered in blood that might be his, or might be someone else's, and he's fighting with a ferocity that seems almost mechanical, like he's done this so many times it's become routine. His spear darts out, catches an enemy soldier in the throat, pulls back, moves to the next target. He doesn't even seem to think about it. You grab a fallen spear from the mud, whose spear from which army you have no idea. It's slippery with blood and mud, and the shaft is cracked halfway down, but it's a weapon. You clutch it like a lifeline and try to stay close to the scarred man, because he seems to know what he's doing, and right now that's the closest thing to safety you're going to find. The melee has no rhythm, no flow, just moment-to-moment survival. Thrust when you see an opening, block when you see a weapon coming at you. Try not to slip in the mud that's rapidly becoming a mixture of blood, urine, feces, and churned earth. Bodies are underfoot, the wounded, the dying, the already dead, and you're stepping on them because there's nowhere else to step. You feel ribs crack under your boot, and try not to think about whose ribs they were. A sword, an actual sword wielded by someone who must be a man-at-arms or a knight, who's dismounted, cuts through the air near your head. You don't see where it came from, just see it swing past, and if you'd been 6 inches to the left, your head would be rolling in the mud right now. The randomness of survival is terrifying. You're not staying alive through skill or courage. You're alive through some sheer stupid luck, and luck runs out. Robert, your tent mate, your friend, appears through the chaos, and there's something wrong with his face. It takes you a second to register what his jaw's hanging at an odd angle, broken or dislocated, and blood is pouring from his mouth. He's trying to say something, but only gargling sounds come out. His eyes find yours, and there's pleading in them for help, for mercy, for something you can't give him because you're barely surviving yourself. Then he's gone, swallowed back into the chaos, and you don't know if you'll ever see him again. The fighting is starting to develop patterns now. Your formation, what's left of it, is being pushed back. You can feel it in the way the pressure from behind has lessened the way there's suddenly more space to move. That's not good. In formation, fighting giving ground usually means losing. The enemy's advancing, stepping over their dead, and yours pressing the advantage. Some of your allies are breaking turn into run, and when men start running, the whole line can collapse like a house of cards. You hear a trumpet, yours or theirs, you can't tell. Commands are being shouted, but they're inaudible over the screaming and the clashing and the general chaos of battle. You're moving backward without meaning, to just swept along by the tide of men around you, trying not to trip over bodies, trying not to drop your weapon, trying not to die in the next 5 seconds. And then as suddenly as it began, the immediate pressure lessens. The enemy has stopped advancing, maybe they're reorganizing, maybe they're as exhausted as you are. There's a gap now, maybe 10 feet of corpse-strewn ground between the two formations. Both sides are breathing hard, regrouping, pulling their wounded back, preparing for the next surge. You've survived the first clash. Congratulations. Now you get to do it again. The brief lull in fighting is almost worse than the actual combat. Now you have time to process what just happened. Time to look around and see the horror show that surrounds you. The ground between the two formations is carpeted with bodies, some still moving, most not. The wounded are making sounds that you'll never be able to unhear, sounds that shouldn't come from human throats. One man is screaming for his mother over and over, a high, keening wail that cuts through everything else. Another is trying to hold his intestines inside his body with both hands, his face grey with shock. You look down at yourself and realise you're covered in blood. Your hands, your arms, your gambeson all soaked red. Some of it is probably yours, though. Adrenaline is masking any pain you might be feeling. Most of it belongs to other people. The young soldier you stabbed, the bodies you stepped on, the spray from wounds inflicted near you. You're wearing other men's death, and the smell of it is overwhelming copper and iron and something else, something organic and wrong. Your legs are shaking so badly you can barely stand. The adrenaline that carried you through the last few minutes is starting to ebb, and your body is realizing how close you came to dying. Are still close to dying. This isn't over. The enemy formation is still there, maybe 50 strong, reorganizing just like your side is. You can see their officers moving among them, shouting orders, threatening stragglers, pushing men back into line. Just like your sergeants are doing right now. The formation you're in has been devastated. You started with maybe 40 men in your immediate section. You can see maybe 25 still standing, and some of those are wounded badly enough that they won't last long. The young man who was on your left at the start, gone. Fled or dead, you don't know which. The scarred man who was on your right is still alive. You can see him 10 feet away, wiping blood off his face with the back of his hand, breathing hard. His eyes meet yours for a moment, and there's a grim understanding there. We're still alive. For now. Someone stumbles past you, and it takes you a second to recognize him. It's Jeffrey, the sadistic sergeant who liked to humiliate soldiers. Except now he's the one being humiliated by circumstance. His left arm is hanging useless, nearly severed at the shoulder, held on by a strip of flesh and his mail shirt. He's in shock, stumbling in circles, his eyes unfocused. Nobody moves to help him. Maybe they are too shocked themselves. Maybe they remember how he treated them and figure this is karma. He collapses about 20 feet away and you don't see him move again. Water. You need water desperately. Your mouth tastes like copper and bile, and your throat is so dry it hurts to breathe. But your water skin was lost somewhere in the chaos, dropped, cut from your belt, stolen. Who knows? You look around for water, for anything to drink, and realise with dull horror that the only liquid readily available is blood. The puddles at your feet are more red than brown. You're not that desperate yet. Not quite. The wounded between the formations are still crying out, begging for help that isn't coming. Medieval battlefield medicine has a simple triage system. If you can walk, you're fine. If you can't walk but might survive, someone might drag you to the rear eventually. If you're clearly dying, you're left where you fell. The man trying to hold his guts in, he's in that third category. Nobody's going to help him. He'll lie there screaming until he bleeds out or goes into shock, or someone mercifully stabs him to end his suffering. Here's something historians don't always emphasize: the psychological break that happens during battle. You're not thinking clearly anymore. Your mind has narrowed to pure survival instinct, animal-level consciousness. Complex thoughts are beyond you. Strategy tactics, even basic human empathy, all secondary to the overwhelming need to stay alive. You're looking at wounded men suffering and you feel almost nothing. Not because you're a psychopath, but because your brain has shut down everything except the most basic threat assessment functions. A trumpet sounds yours this time, you think. Officers are shouting, and the message filters through the ranks. Prepare to advance. They want you to attack, to move forward into that killing ground and engage the enemy again. Every fibre of your being is screaming to run, to flee, to get as far from this nightmare as possible. But the sergeants are behind you with drawn weapons, and the penalty for cowardice is death, and somehow death by execution seems more terrifying than death in battle, because at least in battle there's a chance. The formation is attempting to reform, squeezing together, filling the gaps left by the dead and wounded. You find yourself in the second rank now, not through any achievement, just because so many men in front of you died. The second rank is more dangerous than the third. You'll make contact with the enemy sooner. Your chances of surviving the next clash just dropped significantly. The scarred man ends up next to you again, and he glances over, sees your terror, and actually laughs a short, bitter bark of sound that's more despair than humour. First battle, he asks, his voice rough. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak. You're doing fine, he says, which is such an absurd lie that you almost laugh yourself. Keep your spear point up. Stay in formation. Don't try to be a hero. What if I can't you start, but he cuts you off? You can, because the alternative is dying, and you don't want to die. He hefts his spear, rolls his shoulders. Nobody wants to die. That's what keeps us fighting. Not courage, not honour, just the fact that fighting is slightly less terrifying than standing still and letting them kill us. It's the most honest thing anyone said to you about combat, and somehow it helps. Slightly. Infinitesimally. You're still terrified, still shaking, still covered in blood and piss and probably about to die. But you're not alone in that terror. Everyone around you is feeling the same thing. The trumpet sounds again. The formation lurches forward. Your feet move without conscious thought, carrying you back toward the enemy, back toward the violence, back into the meat grinder. You're not brave. You're not heroic. You're just one more terrified human being caught in the machinery of the medieval warfare, and the machine is grinding forward again. The enemy formation is advancing too. 50 feet between you, 40, 30. The gap is closing, and you're about to do this all over again, the screaming, the stabbing, the desperate survival. Your hands tighten on your cracked spear shaft. Your teeth are clenched so hard your jaw aches. 20 feet. The scarred man beside you mutters something that might be a prayer. 10 feet. Someone in your rank screams a war cry or just panic, impossible to tell. 5 feet. You can see their faces again. Different faces this time. The ones from the first clash are dead or wounded or in the back ranks now. Fresh meat for the grinder. Impact, and it starts all over again. This time, you know what's coming, and somehow that makes it worse. The first clash had the numbing quality of shock of things happening too fast to process. This second collision is different. You're aware of every detail, every horrible moment, and you can't unsee any of it. The formations crash together, and you're immediately shoved forward by the men behind you, pushed into stabbing range whether you're ready or not. The key to surviving in formation is simple in theory, nightmarish in practice. Stay together. A formation is strong because it's a collective organism, shields overlapping spears, creating a wall of points, everyone supporting everyone else. Break formation, become an individual, and you're dead within seconds. So you stay pressed against the man to your left, and the man to your right stays pressed against you, and you all shuffle forward together like some grotesque many-legged creature. Your cracked spear is already proving to be a liability. The first time you thrust it at an enemy soldier, a middle-aged man with a dented helmet and pure terror in his eyes, The shaft flexes wrong, and your thrust goes wide. He counters with his own spear, and you barely deflect it with the shaft of yours. The impact makes the crack worse. You can feel the wood splitting, separating. Another few blows and this thing is going to break completely, and then you'll be in serious trouble. The man to your left isn't staying in formation. He's panicking, swinging his spear wildly, hitting nothing, creating gaps that the enemy's trying to exploit. You want to scream at him to stay in line, but there's no air in your lungs for screaming. No mental bandwidth for anything except the immediate threat in front of you. An enemy soldier sees the gap, tries to push through, and suddenly he's too close inside spear range, which means your primary weapon is useless. You do the only thing you can, you smash him in the face with the butt end of your spear. You feel something crunch his nose probably, and he reels backward, blood pouring down his face. But he doesn't go down, and now he's even more aggressive, roaring with pain and rage, swinging his weapon in wild arcs. You're backing up without meaning to losing ground, and the formation is starting to buckle around the gap that's forming. The scarred man saves you. Again. He's there suddenly, his spear darting out like a snake's tongue, catching the bleeding soldier in the exposed throat. The man goes down, choking, drowning in his own blood, and the scarred man is already moving to the next threat. He's fighting like a machine, efficient and brutal, no wasted movement. You realize that he's done this before? Multiple times. He's survived multiple battles, which makes him incredibly rare and incredibly dangerous. Your spear shaft finally gives up. Mid-thrust it snaps completely, leaving you holding a 4-foot stick with no point. For a moment you just stand there staring at the broken weapon, stupidly, your mind unable to process this development. Then survival instinct kicks in. You drop the useless shaft and draw your knife, your last weapon, your final line of defense utterly inadequate for this situation. Fighting with a knife in a formation battle is suicide. Knives have a reach of maybe 8 inches. Spears have a reach of 8 feet. The math isn't complicated. You need a weapon and you need it now. Your eyes scan the ground desperately, looking for anything: a dropped spear, a discarded sword, anything longer than the knife in your hand. There. 5 feet to your right. A spear lying in the mud, its previous owner very clearly dead beside it, most of his head caved in by something heavy. You break from formation, a potentially fatal mistake, and lunge for the weapon. Your hand closes around the shaft just as an enemy soldier sees you, sees the opportunity and moves in for the kill. Time does that weird thing again where it simultaneously speeds up and slows down. You can see the enemy soldier's spear coming at you in crystalline detail, the iron point slightly bent with rust spots and dried blood on it. You can see the trajectory, know exactly where it's going to hit your chest, slightly left of centre, probably right through your heart if it gets past the armour. You're pulling the salvaged spear toward you, trying to bring it up in time, knowing you're not going to make it. The man to your right, not the scarred man, someone else you don't know, suddenly steps in front of you. Not out of heroism or sacrifice or any noble motivation. He's just shuffling in formation, moving to fill a gap, and his timing happens to put him in the path of the spear meant for you. The point takes him in the side, punching through mail and gambeson and flesh, and he screams high and piercing the sound of a man who knows he's just been killed. You're back in formation now, weapon in hand, and the man who just inadvertently saved your life is collapsing beside you. His eyes find yours, and there's accusation there, or maybe just pain, or maybe you're projecting your own guilt onto a dying man's face. Then he's down and someone is stepping on him, and the battle continues because battles don't pause for individual tragedies. The fighting is less intense now, both formations are exhausted, moving slower, hitting with less force. This is the grinding phase of battle, where it becomes a question of who breaks first. Not who's more skilled or better equipped, But who's more willing to keep standing in this nightmare for another few minutes? Morale is a physical thing you can almost see draining from the men around you. Shoulders slumping, movements becoming sluggish. The battle is eating everyone alive, digesting soldiers into corpses. Someone in the enemy formation breaks, just turns and runs screaming, and suddenly 2 more are running, and then 5, and the collapse is spreading like a disease. Their officers are screaming at them to hold, are literally cutting down their own men to stop the rout, but it's too late. The formation is disintegrating men, scattering in every direction, and your own side is surging forward with renewed energy, sensing victory. You're swept forward in the surge, stumbling over bodies, your salvaged spear held out in front of you. More for balance than for fighting, the organised battle is over. Now comes something arguably worse, the pursuit. Running men are easy targets, and the bloodlust is up in your comrades. They're chasing down fleeing enemies, stabbing them in the back, clubbing them to the ground. There's no honour in it, no glory, just slaughter pure and simple. You find yourself standing over a fallen enemy soldier who's given up running. He's on his knees in the mud, hands raised, screaming something in a dialect you can barely understand. Mercy, probably. Surrender. Quarter. He's young, maybe 17, and he's pissed himself and his whole body is shaking with sobs. Your spear is pointed at his chest. Your hand is steady. One thrust and he's dead. One thrust and you've killed another human being who's begging for his life. He's defenseless, defeated, harmless. Killing him would be murder, not combat. Behind you, someone shouts, "No prisoners, can't feed 'em, can't guard 'em, finish them all." The young soldier's eyes are locked on yours, begging, pleading. His lips are moving in what might be prayer. Your hand tightens on the spear. You don't kill him. You step back, lower your spear, and turn away before anyone notices your hesitation. The young soldier scrambles to his feet and runs, and you don't watch to see if he makes it. Maybe someone else cuts him down. Maybe he escapes. You'll never know. And right now you can't afford to care. You've got your own survival to worry about, because even though the battle seems to be winding down, the danger is far from over. Your left arm is throbbing now, and when you look down you see blood seeping through a tear in your gambeson. You don't remember getting hit there. Adrenaline masked the pain, but there's a gash maybe 3 inches long across your bicep. Not deep enough to be immediately life-threatening, but deep enough that it needs attention before infection sets in. And infection will set in. That's not a possibility, it's a certainty. The blade that cut you was covered in God knows what, and the wound is already contaminated with mud and blood and all the filth of the battlefield. The pursuit is petering out as exhaustion overtakes bloodlust. Men are stumbling back toward your original position, breathing hard, some still carrying looted weapons or armor stripped from the dead. The battlefield is quieting, the screaming dying down to occasional whimpers and moans from the wounded who are still clinging to life. The living are gathering in loose groups, checking themselves for injuries, looking for friends who might not have made it. You find the scarred man sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the field, and he's in rough shape. There's a cut across his forehead that's bleeding into his eyes, and he's cradling his left hand against his chest. Several fingers are bent at wrong angles, broken, probably crushed by a weapon strike or trampled in the chaos. He looks up as you approach, and his face splits into a pained grin. "Still alive?" he says, like it's a joke. Maybe it is. "Didn't think you'd make it, to be honest. First battle and all. Almost didn't," you admit, sitting down heavily beside him. Your legs are shaking so badly you're not sure you could stand even if you wanted to. "Lost my spear. Had to grab another one." He nods like this is completely normal. "Happens. I've gone through 3 or 4 weapons in a single fight before. You adapt or you die." He lifts his broken hand, slightly winces. "This is going to be a problem though. Can't hold a weapon properly with a hand like this." You know what that means even if he doesn't say it. A soldier who can't fight is a soldier who doesn't get fed, who doesn't get a share of any loot, who becomes dead weight the army can't afford to carry. He might be discharged, sent home without pay, expected to survive on his own with a crippled hand. Or he might just be left behind when the army moves on, abandoned to whatever fate finds him. The reality of medieval military medicine is about to become very personal for both of you. There are no field hospitals, no ambulances, no professional medical corps. There are barber surgeons, men who cut hair and pull teeth in peacetime, and allegedly know something about treating wounds in wartime. Their medical knowledge is a mixture of ancient theory folk remedies and trial and error brutality that kills as many men as it saves. A barber surgeon is moving through the wounded now, and you can tell who he is by the screaming that follows in his wake. He's a squat man with blood-stained hands and a leather apron that's seen better days, better decades probably. His tools are in a sack slung over his shoulder, knives, saws, needles, thread cauterizing irons, and various bottles of substances that are supposed to help but probably don't. He reaches the scarred man, first takes one look at the broken hand and shakes his head. "Can't do much with that," he says bluntly. "Bones are too shattered. Best I can do is splint it and hope it heals straight. Probably won't. You'll likely lose use of those fingers permanently." The scarred man just nods his face carefully blank. "Do what you can." The surgeon pulls out some wooden splints and leather strips and goes to work, and even though he's not cutting or cauterizing, the scarred man's face goes grey with pain as broken bones are manipulated and bound. No anaesthetic, no pain medication, just raw agony endured through gritted teeth. Historians still argue about whether medieval people felt pain differently than modern humans. Spoiler alert, they didn't. They just had no choice but to endure it. Then the surgeon turns to you. "Let's see that arm." You peel back the torn gambeson, and he examines the gash with the clinical detachment of someone who's seen thousands of similar wounds. "Not too bad," he announces, which seems insane given that your arm is sliced open and bleeding. "Needs cleaning and stitching. Hold still." What follows is an education in medieval medicine that you could have lived without. First, he pours something from a bottle onto the wound wine probably, or maybe vinegar, and the pain is instant and spectacular. It feels like your arm is on fire, like someone is holding a torch directly against the wound. You scream. Everyone screams during this part, there's no shame in it. Then comes the stitching. He uses what looks like ordinary thread, probably the same stuff used to repair clothing, and a needle that might have been cleaned but probably wasn't. He pushes the needle through your flesh, one side of the wound, and then the other, pulling the edges together with quick, efficient movements. Each puncture is a fresh agony, a sharp, stabbing pain that makes the initial wound seem mild by comparison. "Try not to move," he says helpfully, as if you have any control over your body's instinctive flinching. 6 stitches later, he ties off the thread and nods in satisfaction. "There! Keep it clean, wash it with wine or vinegar when you can. If it starts smelling rotten or turning black, come find me and I'll cut off the arm before the rot spreads to your body." He says this so matter-of-factly that it takes you a moment to process the implications. Amputation, gangrene, death from infection. These aren't remote possibilities, they're likely outcomes. You've just survived a battle, but the battle against infection is only beginning, and you might lose that one even though you won this one. The surgeon moves on to the next wounded man, and you're left sitting there, cradling your freshly stitched arm, trying not to think about the fact that a piece of dirty thread is now the only thing holding your wound closed. The stitches pull uncomfortably every time you move. They'll probably get infected. The wound will probably suppurate, fill with pus, and you'll develop a fever, and then it's just a question of whether your body can fight off the infection or whether it kills you. Around you, other wounded men are receiving similar treatment. Broken bones being set without anesthesia. wounds being cauterized with red-hot irons, the smell of burning flesh, mixing with the already overwhelming stench of the battlefield. One man is having an arrow extracted from his thigh, and his screams are so loud they're drowning out everything else. The barber surgeon is digging in the wound with a knife trying to find the arrowhead, and blood is pouring out, and the wounded man is going into shock, his screams fading to whimpers. You look away. You've seen enough horror for one day, for one lifetime really, though you suspect this is just the beginning of many such days, if you survive long enough. The scarred man is looking at his splintered hand with an expression that might be resignation, or might be despair. 10 years, he says quietly. 10 years I've been doing this. Survived 7 battles, more skirmishes than I can count. And now I'm probably done because my hand got crushed. He laughs, but there's no humour in it. At least you got both hands still working. Don't waste them. You don't know what to say to that, so you say nothing. You just sit there beside him, 2 wounded soldiers among hundreds watching the sun sink lower in the sky, and wondering if you'll live to see it rise again. The battlefield is still active with men moving around, but the nature of the activity has changed. The killing is mostly over. Now comes the looting, and it's conducted with an efficiency that's almost businesslike. Soldiers are moving among the dead and wounded, stripping them of anything valuable. Weapons, armour, boots, belts, coins, if they're lucky enough to find any. This isn't considered dishonourable. This is how medieval soldiers supplement their meagre pay. This is survival economics written in blood. You watch a man from your company kneel beside a corpse and methodically work through its pockets and pouches. He finds a knife better than the one he has and takes it. He finds a leather belt with a decent buckle and takes that too. He even takes the dead man's boots, struggling to pull them off stiff feet. The corpse's face is frozen in an expression of surprise, like death caught him off guard. Maybe it did. Maybe death always does, even when you're standing on a battlefield expecting it. The ethical lines are blurry here. Taking from the dead seems reasonable enough, they don't need their possessions anymore. But what about the wounded? You see soldiers approaching men who are still alive, still conscious, and demanding they hand over valuables. Some wounded comply immediately, hoping that cooperation will earn them mercy, or at least indifference. Others try to resist and are quickly persuaded by threats or casual violence. One man refuses to give up a ring, and the soldier trying to take it simply cuts off his finger. The wounded man's screams are ignored by everyone except you, and you force yourself to look away because there's nothing you can do about it. Here's something they don't put in the heroic ballads soldiers loot their own dead too. That corpse over there in your army's colours, someone's going through his pockets right now, taking his last pennies, his spare shirt, his eating knife. The dead man's family will never know what happened to these items. They'll never receive compensation. The army isn't going to inventory personal effects and ship them home. Whatever a soldier owned when he died becomes community property for whoever gets there first. You think about doing some looting yourself. Your equipment is damaged, your gambeson is torn, you had to steal a replacement spear, your boots are falling apart. You could use better gear. And there's money in it potentially enough to make the difference between eating well and starving when you finally get discharged from this nightmare. But something holds you back. Maybe it's squeamishness, maybe it's some residual sense of morality, or maybe you're just too exhausted to care. You sit there with your throbbing arm and watch other men get rich off the dead. Then you hear it. A sound that makes your blood run cold even though you've been expecting it. The distinctive thrumming whistle of arrows in flight. Not just 1 or 2 dozens, maybe hundreds, all launched simultaneously from somewhere beyond your visual range. The sky darkens slightly as the arrow storm arcs overhead, reaching its apex, beginning its descent. Shields. Someone screams, but most of the men on the field don't have shields, and those who do barely have time to raise them before the arrows arrive. The impact is like deadly rain. You hear the thunk, thunk, thunk of arrows hitting ground, hitting bodies, hitting armour. Men who survived the melee and were just standing around congratulating themselves on their survival are suddenly sprouting arrows like grotesque decorations. An arrow hits the ground 2 feet from you, vibrating with the force of impact, its iron tip buried 6 inches into the mud. Another passes so close to your head you feel the displacement of air against your cheek. The scarred man has thrown himself flat, and you do the same, pressing your face into the blood-soaked earth, making yourself as small a target as possible. The arrows keep coming, wave after wave of them launched by enemy archers, who are either making a last desperate stand or taking revenge on the victors. Medieval longbows could loose an arrow every 5 seconds in the hands of a skilled archer, and could punch through mail at close range. At longer ranges they relied on volume shoot enough arrows and some will find targets. The screaming starts again. Men who survived swords and spears are being killed by distant enemies they can't even see. An arrow comes down at a steep angle and takes a looter through the top of his shoulder, driving down through his body and emerging somewhere near his hip. He doesn't die immediately, just stands there looking down at the shaft protruding from his body, with an expression of absolute bewilderment before his legs give out and he collapses. You press yourself even flatter, and you're praying again wordless, desperate prayers to any deity that might be listening. The arrows keep falling. One hits your discarded helmet 3 feet away with a clang that makes you flinch. Another hits a corpse near you and the body jerks with the impact like it's still alive. The randomness of it is maddening. There's no skill involved in surviving an arrow storm, no way to protect yourself except luck, and maybe being in the shadow of something larger. Historians still argue about the actual effectiveness of medieval archery in battle. Some sources claim arrows could penetrate plate armour. Others insist they mostly just caused chaos and fear rather than massive casualties. From where you're lying in the mud with arrows falling around you like divine judgment, the academic debate seems irrelevant. Effective or not, they're terrifying and men are dying and you might be next. The arrow storm finally stops. Maybe the archers ran out of arrows. Maybe they retreated. Maybe they were driven off by a counterattack you can't see. The silence after the last arrow falls is almost as shocking as the initial attack. You lie there for a long moment, not moving, waiting to see if it starts again. Around you, other survivors are slowly raising their heads, checking themselves for new wounds, trying to process this fresh horror. You sit up carefully, and you realise with a sort of detached horror that you're shaking uncontrollably. Not just your hands, your entire body's trembling like you've been dunked in ice water. Combat exhaustion, fear, shock, adrenaline, crash, all of it hitting at once. The scarred man is sitting up too, and he's shaking just as badly as you are, which is oddly reassuring. Even experienced soldiers break down eventually. The arrow storm has added maybe 20 or 30 new casualties to the field men who were walking and talking 5 minutes ago and are now dead or dying. One of them is the man who was looting corpses earlier. He's got an arrow through his throat and he's drowning in his own blood, making horrible gurgling sounds. Nobody moves to help him. What would be the point? There's no treatment for an arrow through the throat. He'll be dead in a minute or two, and all anyone can do is watch. You look at your stitched arm. The arrow storm made you flinch and move, and the stitches pulled. One of them might have torn open. You can feel fresh blood seeping down your arm, warm and wet. The wound is compromised now, more likely to become infected, more likely to kill you slowly over the next few days or weeks. The sun is setting properly now, painting the sky in colours that would be beautiful in any other context. Here, with the screaming of the wounded and the smell of death thick in the air, the sunset just seems like nature's indifference to human suffering. The day is ending. The battle is over. You survived. Now you just have to survive the night and the infection and whatever comes next. As the sun sinks lower, a new terror emerges on the battlefield, the cavalry. Not in combat this time, but in the aftermath, and somehow that's worse. You hear them before you see them, the thunder of hooves, multiple horses moving at speed, and every surviving soldier on the field tenses. Cavalry on a battlefield full of wounded and scattered infantry is like a wolf among sheep. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and a warhorse weighs over 1,000 pounds. They come sweeping across the field, and at first you think they're pursuing fleeing enemies. Then you realise with dawning horror that they're simply moving through the area and they're not being particularly careful about where they step. A warhorse doesn't distinguish between dead bodies and living ones when it's moving at a canter. Its rider might not even notice the difference high up in the saddle, focused on whatever tactical objective they've been given. You scramble out of the way as a mounted knight thunders past his horse's hooves, missing you by inches. The horse tramples a wounded man who was too injured to move, and you hear bones crack like dry wood. The wounded man's scream cuts off abruptly. The knight doesn't even slow down. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe he didn't care. The distinction doesn't matter to the man who's now been crushed to death after surviving the actual battle. The scarred man grabs your good arm and pulls you toward the edge of the field, away from the main thoroughfare where the cavalry is moving. "Get clear," he hisses. "Horses are more dangerous than swords right now. They'll trample you without even meaning to." You both stumble toward the tree line, joining other survivors who've had the same idea. The horses continue their deadly parade across the battlefield, and you watch in sick fascination as more wounded men are trampled, as bodies are kicked and scattered by iron-shod hooves, as the cavalry inadvertently kills men who survived everything else that they threw at them. Here's a grim reality that historians sometimes gloss over. More soldiers died from being trampled by their own cavalry than most people realise. Horses are prey animals easily spooked, hard to control in chaos. Even trained war horses will panic in the right circumstances, and a panicked horse will run over anything in its path. Add to that the poor visibility at dusk, the battlefield covered in bodies and debris riders who are exhausted and possibly wounded themselves. It's a recipe for disaster. One horse goes down hard, its leg finding a hidden pit or body at the wrong angle. The leg snaps audibly even from 30 yards away, and the horse screams an almost human sound of agony and terror. The rider's thrown clear, landing hard enough that he doesn't get up. The horse is still screaming, thrashing on the ground, its broken leg flopping uselessly. Eventually someone will have to kill it. A warhorse is valuable, worth more than a dozen-foot soldiers, but a horse with a broken leg is just dead weight. You wonder if they'll be as quick to put the horse down as they would be to abandon a wounded soldier. Night is falling properly now, and the temperature is dropping. You're soaked with sweat and blood, and as the adrenaline fully wears off, you start to feel cold. Really cold. Your gambeson is torn and wet, offering minimal insulation. Your body's exhausted, running on fumes, unable to generate much heat. Around you, other soldiers are experiencing the same thing. Men who were overheating in their armour a few hours ago are now shivering uncontrollably. Someone gets a fire started, how you don't know, but suddenly there's warmth and light, and men are gravitating toward it like moths. You join them, crowding as close as you dare, holding your hands out to the flames. The fire is built partly from scavenged wood and partly from broken spears and shields. You watch a man throw what looks like a piece of someone's shield onto the fire, and you don't have it in you to care about the disrespect. Warmth is more important than symbolism right now. The conversation around the fire is muted, shell-shocked. Men speak in low voices or don't speak at all, just stare into the flames with hollow eyes. Someone is crying quietly. Someone else is laughing, high, slightly hysterical laughter that goes on too long and makes everyone uncomfortable. These are the sounds of men processing trauma, trying to fit what they experience today into some kind of mental framework that makes sense. Most of them won't succeed. Robert appears out of the darkness and relief floods through you. You'd given him up for dead after seeing his broken jaw during the battle. But he's alive though. He looks terrible. His jaw is swollen to twice its normal size and he can barely open his mouth. When he tries to speak, only garbled sounds come out. Someone hands him a water skin and he tries to drink, but most of the water just runs out the side of his mouth. He's going to starve if he can't figure out how to eat. The surgeons might be able to wire his jaw shut, but that's still weeks of liquid diet, of excruciating pain every time he tries to swallow, of hoping infection doesn't set in. The fire crackles and someone throws on more wood, an actual tree branch this time, scavenged from the forest edge. The flames leap higher, casting dancing shadows across faces that all look decades older than they did this morning. War ages men fast. You've aged years in a single day, gone from however old you were to however old you feel now, which is ancient, decrepit, used up. A sergeant appears at the edge of the firelight and starts calling out names. Roll call. Finding out who survived, who's wounded, who's missing. When he gets to your name, you respond and he makes a mark on a piece of bark he's using as a makeshift ledger. When he calls names that go unanswered, there's just silence, and he makes a different mark. The list of unanswered names is long. Terrifyingly long. Thomas! The sergeant calls. The baker's son, the 16-year-old who'd been crying in your tent this morning. Silence. The sergeant makes his mark and moves on. You realise you never saw Thomas during the battle. You don't know if he died fighting, or if he was one of the ones who ran and got cut down by his own side, or if he's lying wounded somewhere in the dark. You'll probably never know. He's just gone erased from existence, soon to be forgotten, except maybe by his mother back in your village. The sergeant finishes his roll call and delivers the news. We move at first light. Wounded who can march will march. Wounded who can't will be left with the camp followers to either catch up later or not. The implication is clear: if you can't keep up, you're being abandoned. Your stitched arm throbs in response to this information. You can march. You have to march. The alternative is being left behind in hostile territory, with minimal supplies and no protection. Someone asks about burial details for the dead. The sergeant laughs. Actually laughs, though it's not a pleasant sound. Bury them, boy. We've got maybe 400 bodies out there and we're marching in 6 hours. The crows and wolves can bury them. He walks off into the darkness, leaving a circle of men to contemplate the fact that their dead friends will be left to rot in a field, unburied, unmourned, unnamed. The fire burns lower. Men start to drift away, finding places to sleep, though you can't imagine how anyone could sleep after today. You find a spot near the fire, close enough for warmth, but not so close you'll get kicked by someone in the night. You use your salvage spear as a pillow, uncomfortable, but it keeps the weapon close in case of attack. The scarred man settles near you, and Robert curls up on your other side, still making those wet, pained sounds every time he swallows. Above you, stars are appearing in the darkening sky. The same stars that were shining last night, and the night before that, and will shine tomorrow night, whether you're alive to see them or not. Somewhere in the distance you hear wolves howling. They've probably already found the battlefield. By morning the bodies will be scattered and partially eaten. Nature doesn't respect human conflict. Nature just recycles the dead. You close your eyes and try to sleep, knowing that sleep won't come easily, knowing that when it does, it'll be full of the faces of men you killed or watched die. Your arm throbs, your body aches, your mind is fractured, but you're alive. For now, you're alive. Sleep doesn't come, or if it does, it comes in fragments so brief you can't distinguish them from waking nightmares. Every time you close your eyes, you see the young soldier you stabbed his face frozen in shock as your spear punched through his gambeson. You see the bearded man from the first charge, wonder if he's lying dead somewhere on that field. You see Robert's broken jaw, Jeffrey's severed arm, the man trying to hold his intestines inside his body. The images cycle through your mind on an endless loop and there's no escape from them. Around you, other men are having similar experiences. Someone is whimpering in their sleep, actual whimpering like a wounded animal. Someone else is awake and vomiting, though whether from fear injury or just the general horror of the day you can't tell. The fire has burned down to embers and nobody has the energy to feed it. The temperature continues to drop and you're shivering constantly. Now your body unable to generate enough heat to compensate for your wet clothes and exhaustion. Your arm is the worst. The throbbing has intensified into sharp, stabbing pain that pulses with every heartbeat. When you finally give in and check it in the dim light of the embers, you can see that the area around the stitches is swollen and angry looking. The stitches themselves are barely holding. One has already torn through the flesh, leaving a gap where blood and something yellowish are seeping out. That's the infection starting. That's your body beginning to lose the war against the bacteria that were introduced by the dirty blade and the dirty needle and the general filth of the battlefield. Here's the brutal calculus of medieval medicine. Minor wounds killed people all the time. Not immediately, but slowly over days or weeks as infection spread through the body. You could survive the battle, survive the arrow storm, survive the cavalry, and still die from a cut that wouldn't even warrant a hospital visit in the modern world. The mortality rate from infected wounds was staggering. Some historians estimate as high as 50%. For any wound that broke the skin and wasn't immediately cauterized. Your stitched arm puts you in serious danger, and there's almost nothing you can do about it except wait and see if your body can fight off the infection. The psychological damage is harder to quantify, but just as real. You can feel something broken in your mind, some fundamental sense of safety or normalcy that's been shattered and won't be easily repaired. Every sound makes you flinch. Every shadow could be an enemy. Your hands won't stop shaking, and it's not just from the cold anymore. This is what will later be called shell shock or combat fatigue or PTSD, though those terms won't be invented for centuries. Medieval people didn't have a name for it, but they experienced it just the same. The scarred man is awake too. You can see his eyes reflecting the ember light, staring at nothing. His broken hand is cradled against his chest, and even in the dim light you can see how swollen it's become. Broken bones in medieval times often healed. Crooked or didn't heal at all, just left you with a permanently useless limb. He's probably contemplating his future right now, if he even has one. A one-handed soldier isn't much use to anyone. "Can't sleep?" he asks quietly, his voice rough. "No," you admit. "You never can after a battle. Not the first night, anyway." He shifts position, winces at the pain in his hand. It gets not easier exactly, but more familiar. The images fade after a while. The shaking stops. Then you have another battle, and it all comes back. "How do you keep doing it? How do you keep standing in those formations knowing what's coming?" He's quiet for a long moment. "What choice do I have? This is what I am now. I don't know how to be anything else anymore. I've been a soldier longer than I was anything else. Can't go back to farming or trading or whatever I did before that person is dead. Died in my first battle, probably. Now I'm just this." He gestures vaguely at himself with his good hand. A broken thing that knows how to kill other broken things. It's the bleakest assessment of military life you've ever heard, and you can't argue with any of it. You feel the truth of it in your own bones. Something in you died today, too. The person who woke up in that tent this morning, naive, terrified, but still whole, is gone. In his place is this shell-shocked, injured, traumatized creature who's seen too much and can never unsee it. Robert makes a sound beside you and you realize he's crying. Not sobbing, he can't do that with his broken jaw, just tears running silently down his face while his body shakes. You put your good hand on his shoulder and he doesn't pull away. You stay like that for a while, 3 broken men huddled near dying embers trying to make it through the night. Sometime in the dark hours before dawn you must fall asleep because you're suddenly jerking awake to the sound of sergeants shouting. It's still dark, that pre-dawn darkness that's somehow deeper than midnight. Your body is stiff and aching from sleeping on the ground, your arm is screaming with pain, and every muscle you have is sore from yesterday's fighting. But the army is moving, and you have to move with it or be left behind. Getting to your feet is an ordeal. Your legs don't want to support you. Your balance is off and your head is swimming. You're dehydrated, hungry, probably running a low fever from the infection starting in your arm. Around you, other soldiers are in similar condition, men stumbling around like the walking dead, barely functional but forced to function anyway because the alternative is abandonment. Someone passes around what passes for breakfast, hard bread and water. Nothing hot, nothing substantial, just enough to technically keep you alive for another few hours of marching. You try to chew the bread, but your jaw is so tense from grinding your teeth in your sleep that it's agony to open your mouth. You eventually give up and just soak the bread in water until it's soft enough to swallow in chunks. The roll call comes again, and this time there are even fewer responses than last night. Some men who were wounded but alive at dusk died during the night from their injuries. Their bodies are added to the count of the dead left where they fell because there's no time for burial details. The living simply step over the dead and form up into marching columns. You can see the battlefield in the grey pre-dawn light now, and it's worse than you remembered. The bodies are everywhere, hundreds of them twisted in positions that no living person could achieve, their faces frozen in expressions of pain or fear or surprise. The wolves and crows have been at work overnight. Some bodies are partially dismembered, dragged away from where they fell. Others have been picked clean of soft tissue eyes, lips, exposed flesh. It's a vision of hell rendered in flesh and blood and morning mist. The column starts moving and you fall in with the other survivors and you march away from the battlefield without looking back. Behind you, the dead remain unburied, unmourned, and within a few weeks mostly forgotten by everyone except the families who will never know exactly what happened to their sons and fathers and brothers. You've survived your first battle. Congratulations. In a few days or weeks there'll probably be another one. The march away from the battlefield is worse than the march toward it. Yesterday you were terrified, but at least physically intact. Today you're wounded, exhausted, traumatized, and being forced to walk at the same brutal pace, despite the fact that your body is screaming for rest. Your arm throbs with every step, sending pulses of hot pain up to your shoulder and down to your fingertips. The infection is definitely setting in. Now you can feel it, a sick heat radiating from the wound that has nothing to do with the morning sun. The column is noticeably smaller than it was yesterday. Maybe a quarter of the men who marched out didn't march back. Some are dead on that field behind you. Some are too wounded to walk and have been left with the camp followers, their fates uncertain. A few deserted during the night, just vanished into the darkness, gambling that they'd rather take their chances as fugitives than continue with the army. You can't blame them. The punishment for desertion is death. But death is starting to seem like an increasingly likely outcome regardless of what choice you make. Robert is struggling more than anyone. His broken jaw means he can't eat solid food, and the army doesn't carry soup or gruel for the convenience of wounded soldiers. He's been trying to survive on water, and whatever bread he can soak, soft enough to swallow, but it's not nearly enough calories for a man who has to march 20 miles in armour. You can see him weakening in real time, his steps becoming more unsteady, his breathing more laboured. He's going to collapse soon. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but soon. The hierarchy that seemed so important before the battle has softened slightly in the aftermath. Officers are walking among the common soldiers now, and while they're still giving orders and maintaining discipline, there's a subtle shift in the dynamic. Shared trauma creates a kind of solidarity that transcends rank, though only to a point. The knights are still riding their horses, still eating better food, still sleeping in better conditions. The temporary camaraderie has limits. By midday the first man collapses, just goes down face first in the mud without warning, his body finally giving out after pushing beyond its limits for too long. The column doesn't stop. A sergeant checks him briefly, still breathing but unconscious, and makes a decision with stunning speed. Can't carry him, leave him, and that's it. The man is dragged to the side of the road and abandoned. Maybe he'll wake up and manage to catch up somehow. More likely he'll die there alone or be found by bandits or wild animals or enemy soldiers doing their own sweep of the area. You watch this happen with a kind of numb horror. Yesterday, you would have been outraged, would have protested, would have insisted that soldiers don't leave their comrades behind. Today you understand the brutal mathematics of military logistics. The army can't slow down for every wounded or exhausted man. Resources are limited. Every extra person means more food consumed, more supplies used, more vulnerability to attack. The weak are culled not out of cruelty but out of necessity. It's nature read in tooth and claw applied to human warfare. Your own survival is becoming increasingly uncertain. The infection in your arm is progressing rapidly faster than you expected, though you probably should have expected it given the conditions. The wound is oozing now, producing a thin, foul-smelling discharge that soaks through your bandage and crusts on your skin. The skin around the stitches is hot and tight, stretched over swelling tissue. Red streaks are starting to radiate from the wound up your arm. Blood poisoning sepsis, your body's systems beginning to fail in response to the bacterial invasion. Historians still argue about mortality rates from infected wounds in medieval warfare, but the consensus is grim. Without modern antibiotics, even minor wounds could and did kill. The bacteria that cause infection, Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, Clostridium, were everywhere in the medieval world, thriving in the dirt and filth that soldiers lived in. Once they got into your bloodstream, your body's only defense was its own immune system, and immune systems weakened by malnutrition, exhaustion, and stress weren't very effective. You're developing a fever. You can feel it building, that characteristic hot-cold sensation where your skin is burning but you're shivering at the same time. Your thoughts are becoming fuzzy around the edges, taking longer to form, harder to hold on to. Fever-induced delirium is starting to creep in, and you catch yourself losing track of where you are, how long you've been walking, whether the faces around you are real or hallucinations. The scarred man notices your deterioration. He's keeping close to you, and every so often he reaches out with his good hand to steady you when you stumble. "Stay with me," he says, his voice cutting through the fog in your mind. "Keep walking. Don't stop. If you stop, they'll leave you." Arm's bad. You manage to say your tongue thick in your mouth. Infection. He glances at your arm and his face goes grim. Yeah, it's bad. Probably need to get it cauterized or cut off before it kills you. The casual way he says cut off makes the situation real in a way it wasn't before. Amputation. You might lose your arm, and if you lose your arm, you lose your ability to fight, which means you lose your place in the army, which means you're discharged with no pay and no support, and left to figure out how to survive as a one-armed beggar in a world that has no sympathy for the disabled. Or you refuse amputation and die of sepsis, fever, delirium, organ failure, death. Those are your options. Neither is good. The column stops for a brief rest around what you guess is mid-afternoon, though your sense of time is becoming unreliable. You collapse immediately, too weak to even look for shade. The sun beats down mercilessly, and you're so thirsty your lips are cracking, but your water skin is empty and you don't have the energy to go looking for more. Someone, the scarred man, probably pours a little water on your face and it's like a blessing, cool and clean and temporarily relieving. A barber surgeon is moving through the resting soldiers, checking on the wounded. Not out of compassion, but out of practicality, dead soldiers can't fight, and even medieval armies understood that basic medical care improves survival rates. He reaches, you takes one look at your arm, and shakes his head with the expression of someone who's seen this too many times before. "Infection's spreading fast," he announces. "See these red lines? That's poison moving through your blood. Another day, maybe two, and it'll reach your heart. Then you're dead. Can you fix it?" You ask, though you're terrified of the answer. He considers. 3 options. 1, do nothing and let it kill you. 2, cut off the arm above the infection and hope the rot hasn't spread past the amputation point. 3, try cauterizing the wound and hope that burns out the infection before it spreads further. Option 3 is less effective, but you keep your arm. Maybe. You stare at him, trying to process this through your fever-addled brain. What do you recommend? Honestly, cut it off. Higher success rate, but it's your arm. He says this like he's discussing the weather, not the permanent maiming of another human being. Decide quick. We're moving again in 10 minutes. 10 minutes to decide whether to keep your arm or lose it. 10 minutes to choose between a slim chance of survival with 2 arms or a slightly better chance of survival with 1. Welcome to medieval battlefield medicine, where all the choices are terrible and you have to make them while running a 104-degree fever. You choose cauterization. Maybe it's denial, maybe it's hope, or maybe it's just the fevered delusion that somehow you'll be the exception, the one whose body fights off the infection without losing a limb. The surgeon nods with no particular emotion. Your decision doesn't affect him either way. He pulls out a thin iron rod from his kit and walks over to one of the small fires, where men are cooking what little food they have. This is going to hurt worse than anything you've experienced today, he says matter-of-factly, holding the iron rod in the flames. Worse than getting cut. Worse than the stitching. I need you to not move, which means I need people to hold you down. You, he points at the scarred man. And you, he points at another soldier you don't know. Hold his arms. Someone else get his legs. The preparations happen quickly, efficiently, like this is a routine procedure, which it probably is. The scarred man grips your good arm with his unbroken hand, and the other soldier takes your infected arm with surprising gentleness, holding it extended. 2 more men you've never spoken to pin your legs. You're immobilized, held down by your own comrades, and the terror of what's about to happen is almost worse than the anticipation of the pain. The iron rod is glowing now, not red, but orange-white hot enough to sear flesh instantly. The surgeon pulls it from the fire, and even from several feet away you can feel the heat radiating from it. He moves toward you with the unhurried confidence of someone who's done this hundreds of times, and you start to struggle involuntarily, your body's survival instincts overriding your conscious decision to submit to treatment. Hold him steady, the surgeon says, and the hands on you tighten. Deep breath. Try not to scream too loud, you'll scare the other men. He presses the glowing iron directly into your wound. The pain is indescribable. It's not like being cut, which at least has the merciful quality of being sharp and fast. This is burning, searing a pain so intense and all-consuming that for a moment your entire existence becomes nothing but agony. You do scream, everyone screams, and the sound that comes out of you is barely human, more animal than man, raw and primal, and full of an anguish that transcends language. The surgeon holds the iron there for what feels like hours, but is probably only seconds. You can smell your own flesh burning, a nauseating mixture of cooked meat and something chemical and wrong. The pain doesn't stop, doesn't even diminish. If anything, it intensifies as nerve endings are destroyed, as flesh is cooked, as your body tries desperately to process damage it wasn't designed to handle. Then he pulls the iron away and you're gasping, sobbing, unable to form words. Your arm is a white-hot line of agony from shoulder to fingertips. The men holding you don't release their grip immediately. They've learned that sometimes patients thrash in the aftermath, injuring themselves further. You're not thrashing. You're just lying there, shaking, tears running down your face, making sounds that might be words, but are mostly just expressions of pain. The surgeon examines his work with a clinical eye. The wound has been cauterized, the flesh is burned black and sealed, no longer weeping infection. The theory is that the heat has killed the bacteria, burned out the infection before it could spread further. The reality is that cauterization works maybe half the time, and when it doesn't work, you've just added severe burns to your infection problem. But it's done now, the choice has been made, Your flesh has been burned and now you just have to survive the consequences. Keep it clean, the surgeon says, which is almost laughable advice given that you're marching through mud and filth with no way to wash anything. If the burn starts to rot, come find me. I'll take the arm off then. He moves on to the next wounded soldier, his work with you, complete leaving you to process what just happened. The men release their hold on you and you curl into yourself, cradling your burned arm against your chest. The pain is still overwhelming, a constant shrieking presence that dominates your entire awareness. But underneath the pain is something else relief, that it's over, that the cauterization is done and you don't have to anticipate it anymore. And underneath that hope, however fragile, that maybe this worked, maybe the infection is stopped, maybe you'll keep your arm and your life. Robert appears through your pain haze, his broken jaw, making his face a mask of sympathy and horror. He can't speak, but he sits down next to you and puts a hand on your shoulder, and the gesture of solidarity means more than words could. You're both broken now, both maimed in different ways, both trying to survive in a military machine that has no use for damaged parts. The 10-minute rest is over. The sergeants are shouting again and the column is forming up to move. You struggle to your feet with the scarred man's help, and you're shocked by how weak you feel. The cauterization has left you even more depleted than before, your body's resources diverted to healing the fresh burn on top of fighting the infection that might or might not have been stopped. You're running on fumes, now pure, stubborn refusal to collapse being the only thing keeping you upright. The afternoon march is a nightmare. Every step sends jarring pain through your arm. Your fever is still climbing. The cauterization didn't instantly cure the infection, just hopefully stopped it from spreading. The red streaks on your arm are still there, still visible, still terrifying. You might be dying. You're probably dying. But you're walking one foot in front of the other because stopping means being left behind, and being left behind means certain death. You lose track of time. The march becomes an endless trudge through a pain-soaked haze. You're barely aware of your surroundings anymore, just the person in front of you, just the need to keep moving, just the overwhelming desire for this to end somehow. You stumble repeatedly, and each time the scarred man hauls you upright, muttering encouragement or threats, whichever he thinks will work. At some point you have no idea when the column stops for the night. You collapse where you stand, too exhausted to even look for shelter. The scarred man drags you closer to a fire someone's built, and the heat feels good despite the fact that you're burning with fever. Robert collapses next to you, and the three of you lie there in a pile of damaged humanity, too tired to speak, too broken to care about dignity or comfort. Food is distributed, more hard bread, some kind of thin soup that's mostly water with a few vegetables floating in it. You try to eat, but your stomach rebels and you end up vomiting the soup back up almost immediately. Your body is shutting down. Prioritizing survival over digestion and food is apparently not a priority right now. You manage to keep down some water, and that's all. The night's cold again, and you're shivering despite the fever. Someone throws a blanket over you, whose blanket from where you don't know and don't care. You pull it tight around yourself and close your eyes, praying for sleep, for relief, for anything other than this constant awareness of pain and misery. Sleep does come eventually, though it's more like losing consciousness than proper rest. Your dreams are fever dreams, chaotic and terrifying. The young soldier you stabbed keeps dying over and over, and the bearded man's face keeps appearing, asking why you killed him, and you try to explain that you didn't, that you let him live, but the words won't come, and he keeps asking, keeps bleeding, keeps dying in an endless loop. You wake up sometime in the dark hours, and for a moment you don't know where you are, Then the pain in your arm reasserts itself and reality comes crashing back. You're still alive, still in the army, still broken, still surviving somehow. Morning comes too soon, announced by the now familiar sound of sergeants shouting and the general misery of exhausted men being forced to move before their bodies are ready. You feel worse than yesterday, which you didn't think was possible. The fever is still raging, you can tell, because everything feels distant and unreal, like you're watching yourself from outside your body. Your burned arm is a solid mass of pain throbbing in rhythm with your heartbeat. And when you finally work up the courage to look at it, the sight makes your stomach turn. The cauterized wound is angry and weeping, the burned flesh cracked and oozing clear fluid mixed with something yellowish. The red streaks haven't disappeared. If anything, they've advanced slightly up your arm despite the cauterization. The infection wasn't completely stopped. It's still spreading, just slower now. You're still dying, just taking longer to do it. The cauterization bought you time, maybe a few extra days, but it didn't save you. Getting to your feet is an ordeal that requires help from both the scarred man and Robert. Your legs are shaky, your balance is off, and the world keeps tilting in ways that don't make sense. The fever is affecting your perception, making distances hard to judge, making sounds seem to come from the wrong directions. You're operating at maybe 30% capacity, and you're expected to march another 20 miles in this condition. The column forms up, and you take your place through sheer force of habit. The man who was in front of you yesterday isn't there anymore, died during the night, deserted, or just assigned to a different position you don't know. There's a new face in front of you, younger than you by a few years, looking terrified in a way that suggests he's new to the army. Fresh conscript, probably pulled from some village to replace the men who died in the battle. Looking at him is like looking at yourself a week ago, still naive, still believing on some level that things will work out, still not fully understanding what he's signed up for. The march begins, and within the first mile you know you're not going to make it. Your body is done, finished, running on nothing but stubborn refusal to quit, and even that is fading fast. Every step is agony, not just in your arm, but everywhere. Your feet are screaming, your legs are cramping, your back is seizing up, your head is pounding. The fever is climbing higher, and you're starting to experience gaps in your awareness, moments where time skips forward, and you have no memory of the intervening seconds or minutes. Around mid-morning, you start hallucinating. At first, it's subtle shadows at the edge of your vision that resolve into nothing when you turn to look. Then it gets worse. You see your mother walking beside the column, keeping pace with you. And for a confused moment, you think she's actually there before your brain catches up and realizes that's impossible. She's hundreds of miles away, back in your village, probably assuming you're already dead. The hallucination persists anyway, and she's speaking to you though. You can't make out the words over the general noise of the march. The scarred man notices your deterioration. "You're talking to yourself," he says quietly. "Fever's got you. You need to rest, but we can't stop." "I know," you manage to say, though the words feel thick in your mouth. "Just need to keep walking." "You're going to collapse," he says, and it's not a question. "When you do, they'll leave you. You know that. You nod because you do know that. You've seen it happen to others. The army doesn't stop for individual soldiers, no matter how much they've suffered or sacrificed. You're a resource, and when resources stop being useful, they're discarded. It's not personal. It's not even cruel by medieval standards. It's just the way things work. Robert is staying close to you too on your other side. He still can't speak. His jaw is healing wrong, leaving his mouth partially open in a permanent grimace. He's lost weight dramatically over the past few days, his face gaunt and hollow-eyed. He's probably not going to survive much longer either. The two of you are walking dead men corpses that haven't figured out they're supposed to lie down yet. The hallucinations intensify. You see the young soldier you stabbed walking in the column ahead of you. the spear still protruding from his gut. He keeps turning to look back at you with accusatory eyes. You see the bearded man from the first charge, except half his head is missing now, caved in by some weapon you didn't see. You see Geoffrey, the cruel sergeant, dragging himself along on his one good arm, his severed arm trailing behind him like a grotesque tail. None of these visions are real. You know they're not real. But knowing doesn't make them go away. The fever is cooking your brain, disrupting normal perception, and there's nothing you can do about it except endure and hope you don't do something stupid in your delirium that gets you killed. You start to fall behind. It's not conscious you're trying to keep pace, but your legs just won't move fast enough anymore. The gap between you and the man in front of you is widening, and the man behind you is having to slow down to avoid running into you. A sergeant notices, comes over, grabs you by your good arm and shakes you roughly. "Keep up or get left behind," he snarls. "I don't care if you're dying. Die while marching or die in a ditch, your choice." You try to speed up, you really do, but your body won't cooperate. Your legs are moving in slow motion, your feet dragging through the mud, and the gap keeps widening. The scarred man drops back to walk beside you, lending his presence as support, but even that's not enough. You're done. Your body has reached its limit and is shutting down whether you want it to or not. The world starts to fade at the edges, your vision tunneling down to a narrow point directly in front of you. You're vaguely aware of falling of the ground rushing up to meet you, of voices shouting somewhere far away, then nothing. You come to lying on the side of the road. The column has passed you by, you can see it in the distance, continuing without you, a dark mass of humanity, flowing away and leaving you behind. The scarred man is kneeling next to you and his face is grim. "They're leaving you," he says, and there's genuine regret in his voice. "I tried to argue, but the sergeant said you're done. Can't march, can't fight, just dead weight now." You try to speak, but only a croak comes out. Your mouth is so dry your tongue is sticking to your teeth. "Robert stayed too," the scarred man continues. "Said he wouldn't leave you. Stupid bastard. Now we're all getting left behind." He laughs, but it's not a happy sound. 10 years I survived this shit. 10 years and I'm dying on a roadside because I couldn't leave a friend. You manage to focus on him through the fever haze and you see that he's made a decision. He's accepted his fate. He's chosen to stay with you and Robert rather than continue with the army, even though staying means almost certain death. It's an act of loyalty or friendship, or just human decency in a world that has precious little of any of those things. Robert is there too, sitting against a tree, his broken jaw making every breath a laboured wheeze. The three of you broken, dying, abandoned, huddled together on the side of a road in the middle of nowhere, waiting to see what happens next. The army continues its march into the distance. Soon they're out of sight entirely. The sound of thousands of marching feet fades away, leaving only the natural sounds of the forest birds, singing, wind in the trees, the distant sound of running water. You're alone now, cut off from the army, from any support or protection or resources. Just 3 dying men in hostile territory, with no food, no shelter, and very little hope. This is how medieval soldiers often ended, not in glorious battle, but abandoned on roadsides, dying slowly from wounds or disease or simple exhaustion, forgotten by everyone except the few who chose to stay with them. The silence after the army passes is profound and unsettling. For days you've been surrounded by the constant noise of thousands of men marching, shouting, clanking armour, general chaos. Now there's just the 3 of you and the quiet sounds of the forest, and somehow the silence is more frightening than the noise ever was. Silence means isolation. Silence means vulnerability. Silence means nobody's coming to help you. The scarred man is doing what he can to organise your survival, moving with the calm efficiency of someone who's been in bad situations before, and understands that panic kills faster than wounds. He's found a slightly better position off the road deeper in the trees, where you're less visible to anyone passing by. Enemy soldiers, bandits, deserters, from either army, anyone on this road is potentially dangerous, and you're in no condition to defend yourselves. We need water first, he says, speaking more to himself than to you. Then shelter, then food, if we can find any. He looks at you and Robert, assessing your conditions with a clinical eye. You're both in bad shape, might not survive the night, but if we're dying anyway, might as well die trying. His broken hand is useless. He can't grip anything, can't hold a weapon properly, can't even gather firewood effectively. But he has one good hand and years of experience surviving in terrible conditions, which is more than you or Robert have. Robert can barely move his broken jaw, and starvation having reduced him to a barely functional state. And you're burning with fever, your infected arm a constant source of agony, your mind drifting in and out of lucidity. The scarred man leaves you and Robert under a tree and goes looking for water. You can hear him moving through the underbrush, and then the sounds fade as he gets farther away. You're left alone with Robert, and for a long moment neither of you does anything, just sits there breathing, existing, trying to process the fact that you've been abandoned by the army and are probably going to die here. Robert makes a sound, something between a whimper and a moan. His eyes are wet with tears that he's not bothering to wipe away. He's given up. You can see it in his posture, in the way he's slumped against the tree like a discarded puppet. He's a carpenter, or was a carpenter, before he was conscripted. He built houses and furniture, useful things that made people's lives better. And now he's here jaw broken, starving, left to die in a forest, because he made the mistake of trying to help a friend. "I'm sorry," you managed to croak out. "Sorry you stayed." Robert shakes his head slowly, wincing at the pain the movement causes. He points at you, then at himself, then makes a gesture that you interpret as together. He stayed because leaving you alone was worse than facing death together. In the hierarchy of medieval values, loyalty to your companions rated higher than self-preservation. Not that it matters, now loyalty won't keep you warm or fed or alive. The fever is making time do strange things again. You close your eyes for what feels like a moment, and when you open them, the sun has moved significantly across the sky. Hours have passed in what felt like seconds. The scarred man is back and he's brought water. He found a stream somewhere nearby. He helps you drink from a battered cup he salvaged from somewhere, your own equipment. A corpse on the battlefield. You don't know and don't care. The water is cold and clean and tastes like salvation. He helps Robert drink too, which is a challenge given the broken jaw. Most of the water runs out the sides of Robert's mouth, but some makes it down his throat, and that's something. Dehydration kills faster than starvation, and at least you're addressing that problem, however inadequately. "Found something else," the scarred man says, and there's something in his voice, not quite hope, but maybe the absence of total despair. "There's a village maybe 2 miles from here. Saw smoke, heard voices. Small place, probably got hit by the armies passing through, but it's there." A village means potential help. Also, potential danger villagers who've been raided by armies tend to be hostile to soldiers regardless of which side they're on. You're all in your army's colours and equipment marked clearly as military, which could get you attacked or driven off. But it's chance, which is more than you had 5 minutes ago. "Can't move them," the scarred man continues, looking at you and Robert. "Not far anyway. So I'm going to go to the village, see if I can trade for food or medicine or help. You two stay here, stay quiet, stay hidden. If I'm not back by nightfall..." He doesn't finish the sentence. If he's not back by nightfall, you'll know he's dead or captured, or has abandoned you, and you'll die here without him. He leaves before either of you can protest or thank him, moving through the forest, with surprising stealth for a man with a broken hand and days of accumulated exhaustion. Then you're alone with Robert again, 2 broken soldiers hiding in a forest, hoping their third companion can somehow save them. The afternoon passes slowly. Your fever climbs higher. You can feel it, a physical presence pressing down on you, making breathing hard and thinking harder. Your arm has progressed beyond pain into a realm of sensation that doesn't have a proper name, a combination of burning throbbing and deep ache that extends from your fingertips to your shoulder. The red streaks have advanced further up your arm, nearly to your armpit now. The infection is winning. Your body's last-ditch immune response isn't enough. You drift in and out of consciousness, and each time you wake up, you're a little more confused about where you are and what's happening. At one point, you're convinced you're back in your village in your own bed, and the whole military experience was just a nightmare. Then you shift position, and your arm screams, and reality reasserts itself with cruel clarity. Robert has stopped moving entirely. For a moment of pure panic, you think he's dead. Then you see the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He's asleep or unconscious, his body shutting down to conserve what little energy it has left. His face is grey, his breathing laboured. He's dying. You're both dying. The only question is whether you'll die here in the forest, or whether the scarred man will somehow pull off a miracle. The sun is setting when you hear footsteps approaching. Your hand instinctively goes to your knife, the only weapon you still have, and you try to focus on the sound to determine if it's friend or enemy. Then the scarred man appears through the trees, and he's not alone. There's a woman with him, middle-aged, worn face, practical clothes of a peasant. She's carrying a basket with supplies, bandages, herbs, a clay jar of something. Behind her is a younger man, maybe her son, carrying a rough stretcher made from branches and rope. "Village healer," the scarred man explains, breathing hard from the walk. "Told her we had wounded. She came." He pauses. "Cost me everything I had to trade, plus promises we probably can't keep, but she came." The woman kneels beside you first, and her hands are surprisingly gentle as she examines your arm. She makes a sound, not quite disapproval, more like grim recognition of a familiar problem. She's seen infected wounds before. Probably seen a lot of them, given that armies have been passing through this region. "Bad," she says simply. Her accent is thick, her voice rough from years of hard living. "Very bad. Arm should come off, but you're too weak for cutting now. Kill you for sure." She opens her basket and pulls out a clay jar. Honey, old honey. Might help, might not. Worth trying. She spreads the honey directly onto your infected wound, and the relief is immediate and surprising. Honey has antibacterial properties medieval healers didn't know why it worked, but they knew it did, and they used it extensively for wounds. Whether it will be enough to save you is another question entirely, but it's something, and something is infinitely better than nothing. She turns to Robert next, examining his jaw with practiced efficiency. Her assessment is quick and brutal. "Heals wrong. Never right again. Eat only soft food rest of life. Lucky to have life." She gives him some kind of herbal mixture to chew, probably willow bark for a pain, or something similar, and moves on. "Can you move them?" she asks the scarred man. "Village has shelter. Not much, but better than forest. Safer." Between the scarred man and the woman's son, they manage to get you and Robert onto the makeshift stretcher. The journey to the village is a blur of pain and disorientation. You're carried through the forest as darkness falls, and eventually you see lights, candles, or fires, signs of human habitation. You're brought to a small structure that might generously be called a house, more likely a shed or storage building, and laid on a floor of packed earth covered with straw. The woman brings more honey, more herbs, more water. She speaks in her thick accent about rest and prayer and God's will. The scarred man sits nearby, his broken hand cradled against his chest, watching over you and Robert with the vigilance of someone who's lost too many companions to relax his guard now. You close your eyes, and for the first time in days, you feel something like hope. You're not in an army camp, you're not marching, you're not fighting. You're lying in a relatively safe place with something approximating medical care, and maybe you'll survive this after all. Maybe. Sleep, when it finally comes, is deep and dark and filled with nightmares that won't let you go. You're back on the battlefield, but this time you're one of the corpses. You're lying in the mud, unable to move, watching as soldiers step over you and looters rifle through your pockets. You try to scream that you're still alive, but no sound comes out. Then the wolves arrive and they start at your feet, working their way up, and you feel everything but can't move or cry out or escape. You wake up screaming or trying to scream. What comes out is more of a strangled gasp. Your throat is raw, your mouth dry as sand. The woman is there immediately, pressing a cup of water to your lips, making soothing sounds that transcend language. You drink gratefully, desperately, and the water is the best thing you've ever tasted, despite being slightly brackish and tasting of the wooden cup. Daylight is filtering through gaps in the walls. You've survived the night, which is more than you expected. Your fever seems slightly lower, not gone, but reduced from the crisis point it reached yesterday. Your arm still hurts, still throbs with every heartbeat, but the pain has a different quality now. Less like burning, more like deep bruising. You risk a look at the wound and see that the honey has worked some kind of minor miracle. The angry red inflammation has reduced slightly, the weeping has lessened, and the red streaks tracking up your arm have stopped advancing. The infection isn't gone, but it's been checked, pushed back, given your body a fighting chance. Robert is awake too, lying on his own pile of straw a few feet away. He looks marginally better, which is to say he looks like death warmed over instead of death itself. The woman has been feeding him some kind of broth through a reed inserted carefully between his broken teeth, and he's kept it down, which is progress. His eyes meet yours, and there's recognition there, awareness that you've both somehow made it through another night. The scarred man is asleep in the corner, his broken hand still cradled against his chest, his good hand resting on the hilt of his knife even in sleep. Old habits die hard. Even unconscious, wounded, and relatively safe, he's ready to defend himself. That's what 10 years of military service does to a man. Removes the ability to ever truly relax, to ever trust that danger isn't lurking just out of sight. The woman, you still don't know her name, brings more broth for you. It's thin, mostly water with some grain and maybe a few vegetables, but it's hot and it's food, and your stomach accepts it without rebellion. She watches you drink with the critical eye of someone assessing whether you're worth continued investment of her limited resources. You must pass some internal test, because she nods to herself and brings more honey for your wound. "Hey, 2 days," she says, holding up 2 fingers to make sure you understand. 2 days then, soldiers come, must leave before. She makes a sweeping gesture that clearly means you need to be gone. Not safe. For you, for us. Soldiers ask questions, find you, kill us. Must go. You understand. The village helped you out of basic human decency, or maybe just because the scarred man had something valuable to trade, but they can't risk harbouring deserters or abandoned soldiers. When the next army passes through, whether your side or the enemy's, they'll search for stragglers. Finding you here would mean death for everyone. You'd be executed as deserters. The villagers would be punished for harbouring you. 2 days. That's all the sanctuary you get. The question is whether 2 days is enough. You're still feverish, still weak, still unable to walk more than a few steps without assistance. Robert is marginally stronger, but still can't eat solid food, and has lost so much weight he's basically a skeleton. The scarred man is the strongest of the 3 of you, but even he's wounded and exhausted. 2 days isn't enough time to heal, but it might be enough time to recover the bare minimum of strength needed to move. The day passes in a haze of sleep and waking eating when food is offered, drinking water, letting the woman change the honey dressing on your wound. She also brings what looks like mouldy bread at one point and applies it directly to your infection. You're too weak to protest, and besides, medieval healers knew things that wouldn't be rediscovered for centuries. Mouldy bread contains primitive antibiotics penicillin, essentially, though nobody would identify it as such for another 600 years. Whether it's the honey, the mouldy bread, your own immune system, or pure luck, the infection continues to recede. Slowly, grudgingly, but receding. By evening, you can sit up without assistance. By nightfall, you can stand, though your legs shake and you need to lean against the wall. It's progress. Infinitesimal, inadequate progress, but progress nonetheless. Robert makes similar gains. He can sit up, can hold a cup by himself, can move his jaw slightly without screaming in pain. The scarred man's hand remains useless, but the swelling has gone down and he's regained some mobility in his wrist. The woman's son brings news in the evening. Soldiers were seen on the road, maybe 10 miles away. They're coming this direction. You have less than 2 days now, maybe 1 day, maybe less. You need to decide where to go, how to survive once you leave the relative safety of this village. None of the options are good. North, the scarred man says, speaking for the first time since arriving at the village. His voice is rough from disuse. Away from the armies, away from the war, into the hills. Might find a monastery or a hermitage. Might find nothing. But south means more soldiers, more fighting, more death. Can we even make it north, you ask? In our condition, he shrugs with his good shoulder. Probably not. But staying here means certain death when the soldiers arrive. Moving north means possible death. I'll take possible over certain. Robert makes a sound that might be agreement. He's in no condition to argue, and he knows it. The three of you are bound together now by shared trauma and mutual dependence. You'll live or die together, and right now dying together seems like the more likely outcome. The woman returns with more broth and a small bundle, some bread, hard cheese, a water skin. Supplies for your journey. More than she can probably afford to give, taken from mouths that are already going hungry. She pushes the bundle into the scarred man's good hand and says something in her thick dialect that you don't entirely understand, but the meaning is clear enough. Go with God. May he protect you. Don't come back. That night your sleep is lighter, less troubled by nightmares. Your body is beginning to heal, however slowly. The infection is losing its grip. Your fever is dropping. Your strength is returning by tiny increments. You're not healthy. You're nowhere near healthy. But you're no longer actively dying, which is a significant improvement. You dream of home, not the battlefield, not the march, not the horror of the past week. You dream of your village, your family, the life you had before all this. You dream of harvest time, of the smell of fresh bread, of your mother's voice calling you in for dinner. You dream of normalcy, of peace, of a world where you're not a soldier, but just a person living an ordinary life. When you wake, there are tears on your face and you don't know if they're from grief for what you've lost or hope that you might somehow find your way back to it. The second day passes much like the first, eating, drinking, resting, slowly rebuilding strength. By evening you can walk across the small room without assistance. It's not much, but it's enough. It'll have to be enough. As darkness falls on your second night in the village, the woman's son appears with urgent new soldiers on the road less than 5 miles away, moving fast. They'll reach the village by morning. You're out of time. The scarred man nods grimly. We leave tonight, now. Can't wait for dawn. And so in the dark of night, still wounded, still weak, but alive against all odds, the three of you prepare to leave, the only shelter you've known since the battle. You're heading north into unknown territory, 3 broken soldiers with almost no supplies and very little hope. But you're alive, and as long as you're alive, there's a chance, however small. The night is cold and moonless as you stumble out of the village, moving as quietly as 3 injured men can move, which is to say, not very quietly at all. Every step seems to make a noise armor creaking, feet crunching on fallen leaves, laboured breathing that sounds deafening in the silence. The woman and her son watch you go from the doorway of their home, and you catch a glimpse of her face in the candlelight, not unkind, but relieved to see you leave. You're a problem solved, a danger removed, 3 mouths she no longer has to feed from her already inadequate supplies. The scarred man leads the way, navigating by instinct and experience through the darkness. He's moving north as promised, away from the roads where armies travel into the hills and forests, where civilization thins out and survival becomes even more uncertain. Robert is between you and the scarred man, moving slowly but steadily, his broken jaw clenched against pain, his skeletal frame somehow still functioning, despite everything it's been through. You bring up the rear, your wounded arm held close to your body, each step a conscious effort of will over the screaming protests of your exhausted muscles. The first hour of walking is manageable. Adrenaline and fear provide a temporary boost of energy, overriding the weakness and pain. But as the night deepens and the adrenaline fades, the reality of your situation becomes brutally clear. You're 3 wounded men stumbling through hostile territory in the dark with minimal supplies and no clear destination. Every sound could be soldiers hunting for stragglers. Every shadow could hide bandits or wild animals. Every step could be your last. You lose track of time in the darkness. Walking becomes a meditation, a rhythmic pattern of foot following foot, breath following breath, moment following moment. Your world narrows to the back of Robert's head in front of you, and the need to keep moving. Nothing else matters. Not the pain, not the fear, not the future you might not have. Just the next step. The terrain grows rougher as you climb into the hills. The forest here is old-growth thick and dark, with roots that catch at your feet, and low branches that slap at your face. Several times you stumble, barely catching yourself before falling. Once Robert goes down hard, landing on his side with a muffled cry of pain. The scarred man and you help him up, and you continue because stopping means dying, and you're not ready to die yet. Dawn finds you miles from the village, deep in the hills, exhausted beyond measure. You collapse in a small clearing, too tired to go any further. The scarred man does a quick survey of the area, determines it's as safe as anywhere is likely to be, and allows you to rest. You fall asleep almost immediately, your body simply shutting down, and when you wake, the sun is high overhead, and Robert is gently shaking your shoulder. The scarred man has found water, a small stream tumbling down the hillside, and some edible plants that he recognizes from years of living off the land between campaigns. It's not much, barely enough to sustain life, but it's something. You eat the plants he's gathered, drink deeply from the stream, and feel marginally more human. "We can't stay here," the scarred man says, stating the obvious. "Need to keep moving north, put more distance between us and the armies. Maybe find a monastery that'll take us in, or a village far enough from the war that they haven't learned to fear soldiers yet. And if we don't, you ask though, you already know the answer." He shrugs. "Then we die out here. But at least we die, free men, not slaves to some lord's ambition. It's a bleak assessment, but not inaccurate. You've escaped the army, escaped the battlefield, escaped the immediate threat of death. But you've traded one set of dangers for another: starvation, exposure, wild animals, bandits, the simple, grinding attrition of surviving in a medieval wilderness with no resources. Your chances aren't good. Historians would probably estimate your survival odds at less than 50%. But 50% is better than the 0% you are facing on that battlefield. The days that follow blur together into a pattern of walking, resting, foraging, surviving. Your wound continues to heal slowly, transforming from an infected horror into merely a painful scar. Robert's jaw sets crooked, leaving him with a permanent deformity, but at least he can eat soft foods now without agony. The scarred man's broken hand remains useless, but he learns to compensate, doing with one hand what most men do with two. You avoid roads, avoid villages, avoid any contact with other humans. You're deserters now, and desertion carries a death sentence. If you're caught, you'll be hanged or worse. So you stay in the wild places living like animals, surviving day by day with no thought for the future beyond the next meal, the next shelter, the next sunrise. Weeks pass. Maybe months you lose track of time without the structure of military life to mark the days. The seasons begin to change. The air grows colder. You know that winter is coming, and winter in the medieval wilderness is a death sentence for unprepared travellers. You need to find civilization soon, need to find shelter and supplies, or you'll freeze to death in the first serious snowfall. And then on a grey afternoon with the smell of coming snow in the air, you crest a hill and see smoke rising from a valley below. Not the smoke of armies or war, but the peaceful smoke of cooking fires, of homes, of human habitation far from the conflict that nearly killed you. The scarred man looks at you and Robert, and something passes between the three of you, an understanding, a shared decision made without words. You're going down to that village. You're going to take off your armour hide. Your weapons pretend to be travellers or pilgrims or anything other than soldiers. You're going to try to find a place in the civilian world to leave the nightmare of military life behind. It might work. It might not. They might see through. Your deception immediately might turn you away or turn you in. But you have to try because the alternative is dying in these hills as winter closes in. You descend toward the village as the sun sets three broken men who survive the unsurvivable, hoping for one more miracle in a world that's been stingy with miracles. And as you walk, you think about all the soldiers throughout history who faced this same choice fight until you die, or try to escape and live with the consequences. You think about the young soldier, you stabbed the bearded man, you spared the countless others who died on that battlefield while you somehow survived. You think about the randomness of it all, the sheer arbitrary nature of who lives and who dies in war. You survived being a medieval foot soldier on the battlefield, but the battle is just one day in a long campaign of survival. The real war, the war against hunger, disease, exposure, despair, continues long after the fighting stops. You reach the edge of the village as full darkness falls. A dog barks. A door opens, spilling light and warmth into the cold evening. Someone calls out a question you don't quite catch. The scarred man answers his voice steady and calm, weaving a story about pilgrims travelling north seeking shelter for the night. The future is uncertain. Survival is not guaranteed. But right now in this moment you're alive, and sometimes being alive is victory enough. The wind settles through the trees, carrying the last of autumn into winter. The village lights glow warmer now, inviting in their simple promise of shelter. Your feet, those same feet that marched through hell, that stood in formations of death, that stumbled through forests in darkness, they carry you forward one more time. Not toward battle now, but toward the possibility of peace. The weight of your armour is gone, traded, or hidden somewhere in the hills behind you. What remains is lighter, but somehow heavier memory trauma, the knowledge of what you've seen and done and survived. The scarred man's hand will never fully heal. Robert's jaw will always mark him as someone who suffered. Your arm will carry its scar forever, a permanent reminder written in flesh. But scars are evidence of survival of wounds that didn't kill you, of battles you lived through when so many didn't. The medieval world was brutal in ways modern minds struggle to comprehend. War wasn't glory and honour, it was mud and blood and terror, and the grinding, relentless struggle to survive one more day. The soldiers who fought these battles weren't heroes in the mythological sense. They were ordinary people forced into extraordinary horror, doing whatever they had to do to stay alive. As you approach the village, as the stranger at the door considers whether to offer shelter to three battered travellers, you realise something important you wouldn't have lasted a day as a medieval foot soldier if you'd known beforehand what it truly meant. Nobody would. But somehow impossibly you lasted more than a day. You survived the unsurvivable, and now you face the even harder challenge of learning to live with what you survived. The door opens wider, Warmth spills out. Someone offers bread. The simple miracle of continued existence unfolds one moment at a time, and somewhere on a battlefield you'll never return to. The wind moves through grass growing over bones, and the world keeps turning and life goes on. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Good night. Good